Hello?
Hi.
Hi, Mike.
That's not
I think
good.
it's just us.
I'm getting echo from my computer. So I thought I turned off the audio. That's not good. Oh, I didn't turn it off. Okay, that's better.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go on the mute.
Hello?
Let's see. Did I get a thumbs up from IT yet? See. We're almost ready to start. Everybody I think Kevin is absent tonight, so. Just waiting for that proverbial thumbs up from IT that they're ready and on, and they're taping. That's a thumbs up. Okay, with that, I don't have a gavel, so I'll just call the meeting to order. Welcome. I'd like to call the November 4th, 2021 regular meeting of the Encinitas Planning Commission to order at 6:02. Please turn off your cell phones or set them to vibrate. And agendas and speaker slips are available in the back of the room. So roll call. Let the record reflect that 4 of the planning commissioners are present and Commissioner Doyle is absent. And the next item is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please join me in doing our Pledge of Allegiance. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The next item is oral communications. We start each meeting with oral communications where anyone wishing to speak on a topic not on tonight's agenda may request to do so by filling out one of the white speaker slips in the back of the room and handing it to the commission clerk. Dina, do we have any oral communications?
We do. We have 2 this evening. First up would be Gerald Ann Kessler. Following Gerald will be Ali Hosseini. Oh, let's see. Try now.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I would like to speak of the environmental nightmare Staver project on Melba Road that is slated to take down a mature grove of Torrey pines plus 176 other trees in addition to 30 smaller trees and native shrubs and demo a beautiful historical home built in 1938, all based on the ill-advised AB 2345 density bonus bill. As I mentioned before, I found out that there is perhaps some connection in historical value that is related to the Staver property and the botanical gardens, with Anton van Amersfoorth's name on the deed asking for an easement in 1938. Anton was the original owner of the botanical gardens, which is known as the Botanical Gardens, before the Larrabees purchased it from him. It is likely he graduated from dry farming and had water lines installed at his ranch with hose bibs to irrigate the avocado grove and plantings around the house and barn. He was also the director of the Encinitas Water District for many years and survived a recall. My point is that there is a potential historical value of this property and that it should be noted and it should be preserved and restored, not made into a heat island and destroy all the neighboring communities. Perhaps if someone had taken a hard look into this nightmare Goodson project and all the negative impacts on the neighborhood, it could have spared Encinitas community from wasting time and the city employees and planning committee. The Staver project is headed down the same path. The way Brian continues to harass the seniors and longtime neighboring properties is appalling. I would also like to mention Brian removed a fully mature orange tree on Monday, just bulldozed it off the property without preserving the tree or donating it. The property soil should not be moved without informing the neighbors due to the toxins in the land from years of greenhouse usage. Again, Brian is destroying the trees, so he won't have to count them on the total tree count of the land. Why is he allowed to do this? I guess the overworked planners and engineers at the cities are not paying attention to the detail of this environmental nightmare Staver project, which has caused the neighbors to have to lawyer up and defend the land. When this sacred property with its historical value to Encinitas should be preserved and made continuous with Oakcrest Park and the Boys and Girls Club and Garden. Oakcrest Park contains rare endangered plants and species like the California gnatcatchers. The setup could be similar to the Solana Beach San Diego Park or an annex to the Botanical Gardens, serving as an outdoor STEM class for area schools. We just had a walking field trip from the local elementary school to educate them of the value of the property and the trees, hence recreating our own outdoor STEM classroom. This was all done by community members that care about the quality of life in Encinitas and do not wish to be labeled as NIMBY. Please support us in preserving the Encinitas Redwoods, the last piece of open space in old and new in Encinitas, with soft infrastructure funding, which aligns with the Encinitas Climate Action Plan. Thank you for listening.
Okay, next up we have Ali Hosseini.
Good evening to all. I'm Ali. I'm a resident of Cardiff, 215 Manchester Avenue. Case number 14-297 V/DR/CDP. I came to this commission back in 2019, got a conditional approval back then. Two of the conditions that concerned me, especially one of them, I think the city should take the responsibility for that condition, not me. And that responsibility is lining the sewer main. And city's got easement on my property and asked me to add more easement, which I did for this property. So you have 5 feet of easement. And there's a wall sitting on the ground level of, over top of this pipe, which stretches from Manchester all the way to the alley. And some height on this wall is about 7 feet, and toward the end, it reaches about 9 feet. So I'm thinking the plan is, we are planning to put a twin home on this lot, but we're not encroaching into the easement area. And again, I added another foot of easement to stay away from the sewer line. City is responsible, city has access, city has to maintain, repair, and also replace the sewer main, not me. So if you want to line the sewer line, please go ahead. And the cost is too expensive for me to handle it. All right? That's what I want the commissioner, please consider and help me out on this, remove it. That condition. Also, to help the city, really, to help the city, I am putting a water catch in the alley. Water that, a drop of that is not mine. It's coming from all over the Cardiff area. And from one street, from Bond Alley into the People's Yard, getting down to the alley between between Montgomery and Manchester. So I gotta put a catch over there, put a 10-inch pipe, bring it in to the street where the drainage is. So I'm handling that. That's expensive for me as well. But I don't want to touch the sewer main line in it. I think that's responsibility of the city, and the city has to do it, not me. Please remove that condition from me so I can go ahead and move on. I appreciate your time. Thank you. Case number is 14-297 V/DR/CDP. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Anna, is that something that staff is coordinating with Mr. Hussein on?
Yes, so what needs to occur is that he needs to apply to amend his permit so that it comes before the planning commission as a item on the agenda.
So if you can work with staff on that.
I will.
Okay.
Thank you.
That concludes oral communications.
Okay. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes.
Okay, I had one suggestion that right now I think we have a private matter all the way at the end, so and then a public matter or 2 public matters before that. I also think staff had suggested in a memo today to take input today on the, item 8A, but to continue it. So what I'd like to do is put it at the end of the agenda, because we're likely, and I thought that was probably the biggest one anyways, so we're most likely to split it. So I would like to reorder the agenda and handle 8C, the private matter, first, then 8B, as in boy, and then 8A, if I have agreement from the commission. Chris, you agree with that too? You okay? Okay, so we'll change the agenda accordingly. So next up is the consent calendar. And these items are considered non-controversial or routine in nature. All consent calendar items are typically voted on collectively in a single motion without any staff presentation, public comment, or commission deliberation. However, if a member of the public or a commissioner has requested a consent calendar item be heard, the item will be removed from the consent calendar and be given an individual hearing. To pull an item from the consent calendar, a member of the public should submit a pink speaker slip for the specific item number, and the item will be given an individual hearing. Items removed from the consent calendar will be heard individually immediately after the consent calendar vote. Tonight's consent calendar is made up of 3 items. Item 6A, approval of the minutes for the Planning Commission meeting of June 17th, 2021. Item 6B, approval of the minutes for the regular Planning Commission meeting of July 15th, 2021. And item 6C, Warrington Residential Final Parcel Map, case number 18-001 TPM. This is a public hearing to consider approval of the recordation of the final parcel map. The project is located at 735 Santa Fe Drive in Cardiff by the Sea. So are there any items, do we have any speakers on any of the 6A through 6C?
No, we have no speakers.
Does anybody wish to pull any consent calendar? Nope. Okay. So I'll consider a motion to approve.
To do that, I think I need to abstain because I was not present at the meetings on June 17th or July 15th.
Okay.
Okay, I'll note that.
I'll make a motion that we approve the consent calendar.
Second?
Okay. So it looks like we have a motion and a second with Chris abstaining from 6A and 6B. So as soon as the computer catches up, we'll vote. There we go. So it looks like motion passed, and we will now move on to the regular agenda. So as I said, I'm going to go 8C, then B, then 8A. So we'll start with item 8C. So item 8C is the Jack in the Box interpretation, case number NTRP-004738-2021. And this is a public hearing to consider a planning commission interpretation to determine if the change of an establishment from a Jack in the Box to a Starbucks with various site improvements is consistent with the non-conformity regulations within the Cardiff by the Sea specific plan and the Encinitas Municipal Code. The project is located at 1967 San Elijo Avenue in Cardiff by the Sea. Are there, let's see, make sure I get my right page. Are there any disclosures? I have one. Just let me find my note. The trouble with going out of order. It's harder to find stuff. Jeez. Let's see, I had an ex parte communication with Glenn O'Grady, who was the prior planning commissioner chair. I exchanged an email and talked to him on the phone regarding his recollection, not of this case, but of a case that's cited in here, which was the 266 North El Camino Real Starbucks, and when and how the resolutions were signed. The email was forwarded, the email conversation was forwarded to staff, and I think also to the commissioners, so everybody saw it. It only pertained to the facts of the past case and did not discuss the merits of this case, and I can be unbiased in my decision. So, let's see. So we begin with a staff report presented
Bruce?
by,
Bruce, I will
I'm
make
sorry.
one disclosure. I received a personal email regarding this item, and I've forwarded on to the commission as well.
okay, very good. Sorry about that. So now we begin with a staff report presented by Senior Planner Andrew Maynard.
Thank you very much, Chair, Commission, and public. As they indicated, this is a Jack in the Box interpretation, case number 4738-2021. 2020. And the applicant is Jack in the Box Properties, and representing is Cynthia Aldred. As you indicated, the regulatory framework tonight is an interpretation and ultimately a CEQA determination. It's to determine if the proposed changes from the Jack in the Box fast food restaurant to a coffee with a drive-through use is consistent with the Cardiff by the Sea specific plan and Encinitas Municipal Code non-conforming regulations. The site's located at 1967 San Alejo Avenue, which is currently the Jack in the Box. It's located on the corner of San Alejo and Birmingham Drive within the Cardiff by the Sea community. The zoning conditions, it's within the CGC1 zone and also the coastal overlay zone. And it's surrounded by mostly commercial uses, the NCD corridor, and then to the north, we have residential uses and also school use. As we look at the surrounding conditions, on the upper left is immediately to the north of the site. The lower left is the Cardiff Town Center, immediately south. On the upper right is the NCD corridor, which has the railroad corridor, and then a pedestrian and bike paths. And then immediately to the east, we have a mix of commercial uses, mainly office and medical uses. As we look at the on-site conditions, in the upper left is one of the main entrances off San Alejo Avenue to the Jack in the Box site. And then as we go through the photos on the lower left is as you're coming off San Alejo, entering onto the site, some existing parking on the right-hand side. On the upper right, you have the existing drive-through condition. So on the north side, you've got a median with a planter. On the east side, where the cars coming through, there's no delineation of that drive-through. And then the lower right is as you're exiting the site, you see a portion of the drive-through, and then also leaving onto San Alejo Avenue. Background, the use was established in the late 60s and did have various additions in 1970 and 1978, and that was all confirmed with the commercial building record. There was a service request processed by the city on April 8th, 2020. There's also a number of building permits, which include electrical upgrades, ADA upgrades inside, underground utilities, and miscellaneous mechanical improvements. There's also a SAC pre-development meeting, which was held on April 8th, 2020. So there's no CPP required as part of this process, but there was a legal notice within 500 feet of the property, and that was mailed on October 21st, 2021. Staff received approximately 7 inquiries. Those were all forwarded to the commission. There's one included in the staff report prior to release of it, and we did receive one letter from Shepard Mullen, which was forwarded to the commission for consideration. So the overall interpretation as we look at the site improvements, what's being proposed is to close Birmingham Drive access to the site. There'd be the installation of a curb and striping for the drive-through. There'd be reconfigured parking. There would also be the removal of existing mini boards of the Jack in the Box and replacement in different locations, and then also other miscellaneous improvements such as trash enclosure renovation for stormwater purposes, the replacement of monument signs, and overall just rebranding of the physical building, which would include facade improvements, painting, and signage. As we look at the non-conformities, as I indicated, it was developed with a restaurant with a drive-through use in the late 60s, and that was under the County of San Diego, and the zoning at that time was C36, and it was a permitted use at that time. Overall, the project has several structural nonconformities, parking, and also signage. As we look through the non-conforming regulations, I'm not going to read every word, but kind of the key things are non-conformities can't be enlarged, extended, or expanded to increase the inconsistency with our zoning regulations. Also, the use cannot be large, extended in a manner as indicated. And then also for structural nonconformities that can't be enlarged, relocated, or increased in intensity. As we analyze a potential change of use, one key thing we looked at was trip generation data. As you look at some of the other sites, we often look at Sandag and Sandtech type data, and through that it did not distinguish what a coffee shop versus a fast food and drive-through. But those manuals do refer to the IT manual, which has a lot of more current data, and that manual does distinguish two different uses. So one is a coffee shop with a drive-through versus a fast food with a drive-through. And the data you see in the table was based on the 10th edition volume 2 of the IT manual. So through this, you can see kind of the different change uses. So as you look at the peak hour, which 7 to 9, it shows an increase of approximately just over 66 trips, peak hour trips within the peak period. And then as you look at later in the day peak hours, so 4 to 6 p.m., it shows an increase of 14.62 trips. Then on weekends, it shows an increase of 4.83 trips difference between what would be a coffee shop with a drive-through use versus a fast food within the peak period. Overall, this change of use from what's defined in the IT manual as fast food restaurant with drive-through versus coffee shop with drive-through would be an intensification of our nonconformities. As we look at circulation improvements as what's proposed with the project, it would be eliminating Birmingham access, which is indicated in the X in the lower right-hand corner, and then it would limit 1 point of access to the site for the drive-through. Overall, staff did analyze some previous case, and I think you mentioned that in your disclosures. One was case number 16133, which is a minor use permit, administrative design review permit, and coastal development permit. Similar to kind of this use, it was a rebranding effort. There's also some additional parking lot improvements. One thing to note from the Shepard and Mullen letter that we received today was about vesting rights. And with those vesting rights, through that case, it was determined as a vested use. However, the key point of that was a determination if it had ceased within 180 days based on our non-conforming regulations. And through that, ultimately, we did determine that. And they did process a use permit, but the use permit was related to outdoor uses and also related to exceeding sign standards. Overall, as we analyzed this case, it had a detailed circulation study and queuing. Some letters from the Jack in the Box attorneys indicated that there was no nexus for the city to request those, even though it was done through this other project. Through this project, it reviewed overall 3 different locations. And what it did conclude was with enhanced ovens, so there was enhanced improvements with the Starbucks, it would require at least a 9-space queue. And what was actually proposed, though, on the El Camino Real site was queuing and storage, which allowed for actually 27 spaces. And then as we look at the Leucadia Boulevard coffee shop with the drive-through, that had 15 spaces of queuing. And what you see in the picture, if you compare kind of similar dimensions for queuing, it shows 8 spaces. So if we compare that same kind of queuing, the 8 versus 9, even if you moved up parking spaces, likely there'd be spillover into San Alejo at the intersection. As we analyze parking for the site, the curb and striping, it would create a one-way access on the easterly part, highlighted in the blue box. Through that, 4 spaces would be eliminated. The applicant was proposing, highlighted in the yellow, a change from 8 to 12 parking spaces. And then on the south side, there's existing parking spaces within a dedicated area. Overall, you can modify parking. However, parking, if it's non-conforming, the resulting parking needs to meet all of our municipal code standards. The 12 on the top would not comply, so they would not comply with our length. It also would not require with their backup space, and also with striping requirements. Part of the Shepherd-Mullen also report identified a mezzanine on the upper story. Based on our definition, that upper story would not be qualifying as a mezzanine. It would be a floor, and it would still count towards parking purposes, so it would not be exempt. As we look at signage for the overall site, as I indicated, menu boards would be relocated. Currently, we have 2 existing in blue on the site plan, and then the new ones would be approximately in the red location. These changes are basically required to accommodate kind of queuing based on the new use. They also require basically the position of any vehicle would be set back further in the drive aisle. Based on just at least some of the conceptual sizes of the signage, it would not comply with our sign code. As I indicated earlier, with the expansion of non-conformities, you cannot relocate existing non-conformities, so any new signage would have to comply with our sign standards. So CEQA, this would not be considered a project. It's exempt for section 15.06063, based on defined in section 15.378. Based on this, staff's recommend the Planning Commission consider all materials and determine the change of use is inconsistent with our non-conforming regulations and is an intensification of use. Consider all the staff report, kind of findings within the resolution, all public consideration. There was a memo sent correcting some of the parking numbers, also the number of stories within the staff report. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Does anybody have questions of clarification?
I do.
Steve?
The existing driveway on San Elijo closest to the intersection, does that meet the city's distance requirements between the intersection and the driveway?
Good evening, Chair, Commissioners, and members of the public. So I'm here, my name is Pedro Masudi. I'm here on behalf of traffic, so if you have any questions regarding the traffic, I'll answer that. So regarding the distance of the access to the intersection, right now in the existing conditions, so there should be some issues in terms of the, since it's very close to the intersection, yeah, of course.
That answer your question?
Vaguely, yes. Second question, could you clarify what about the existing signage is non-conforming?
Yeah, so it'd be the size location, and you're allowed one on the frontage. So there's currently 2.
So this is the signage out at the street, not the signage at the, like the menu board at
Yeah.
the
So this would be the menu board. The current one is oversized, existing condition, and also the proposed condition.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else with questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Why
I
don't we go
would-
Susan, then Chris?
I would concur with staff's recommendation because of the closed driveway. The increase in intensity of use was
Yeah.
almost double.
Susan, I think right now we're in questions of clarification, and then we'll go to the public
Oh, I'm
hearing.
sorry. Okay.
Yeah, okay. So, Chris?
Yeah, I had some questions about the ITE manual and the data that was used in creating that. Can we go back to that page? Okay, so my questions have to do with how these timeframes were selected and whether or not the ITE data also contains numbers for other times of day that aren't included on this table. Because I think that's something that we would need to look at. So, because this says fast food with drive-through window, and it has 7 to 9 a.m., 4 to 6, and then weekend peak hours, which I don't know what those are. But at a lot of restaurants that have drive-through, the lunchtime hour is also a very popular time. And so I would be very interested in not just seeing these 3 timeframes, but an extended time frame, maybe a 24-hour time frame, to see what the trip generations are throughout a 24-hour period and separately for the weekends.
So the actual IT manual, it identifies kind of just these peak hours. It doesn't have 24-hour. In order to get kind of that data, we would actually need a full study, a trip generation study from the applicant.
I just, okay, so you don't have access to the data at this point? Is it-
The IT manual does not have that specific data, it just has this information.
And what does the IT manual, where does it draw its data from?
So the first of all, let me just talk about some. Actually, when we are talking about the trip generation, normally we use SANDAG as a manual and not so brief guideline, which is basically often based on the trip generation rates in the San Diego area. But when we don't have information of the trip generation of a use, and we cannot find it in SANDAG, we are allowed to go to IT trip generation to get the trip generation rates from IT. So, and as Andrew mentioned, there are some like peak hour volume there, plus weekday and weekend volume, but we don't have all those hours of data actually there. And we have like different kind of uses which are more recent and more like different kind of land uses. But, and it's based on the national rates, not the San Diego area though.
Just to add on to that, it's my understanding it's based on case studies, a number of case studies.
Okay, so how many case studies and from what parts of the country? What kind of communities? How recently was it done?
I don't know that it goes in the actual depth in terms of all locations. But for the fast food restaurant, it looks like it was 67 studies.
When you say study, is that one restaurant in a particular area or a series of restaurants in a community?
It would be based on one restaurant location.
So basically, when we are talking about 67 different surveys, means different 67 surveys all over the nation. Doesn't mean that it's in a specific area, and with different sizes. And that can be actually, it is, we have a chart there that shows all of those different sizes of the surveys. Basically, the peak hour that we are using is the average of that. With a standard deviation, of course.
Any more, Chris?
No, not on that at this point.
Okay, Steve?
I have a question. Was the ITE data used when the Starbucks on Lucadia Boulevard was approved or reviewed, or any other coffee shops with drive-throughs?
This location, it was not. The Orpheus one, and I don't believe it was either. There was an In-N-Out location that did use ITE data for their studies.
I
Thank
think
you.
a traffic study was done for the Lucadia one. That's what I've been told in the past, but I don't know.
That's a good question for staff.
Yeah,
we
so
know?
there was a traffic study done for the Lucadia location, for the El Camino Real location, which was the change of use as well. That had a circulation study and queuing study, but I don't believe a chip generation study.
And just to clarify on the Orpheus, they did not use the ITE, but did they use the Sandag not-so-brief guideline? The one the first default that they go to for traffic?
I believe so, but I would have to double check.
In all likelihood, I guess,
Yes.
is the way to put it.
Right.
And okay. Steve, I think you may have had another, Steph, no?
Done, thank you.
If not, I'll hop in there with a couple. I think, in my mind, I really want to get to the heart of the, I'll call it the vested right, and whether or not it is an intensification. So my questions will be around that. I want to understand, because I think I'm also the only person that was here for the 266 North El Camino Starbucks, the conversion. And I remember passing I thought a major use permit. In fact, I looked at the draft resolution from that night, and that's what it said. And then when I requested the resolution, I got two different copies. So, Andrew, can you give a background? What happened? When did it happen?
Yes, there was an initial meeting, I believe it was February of 2018, that did include a major use permit, and then also the design review and coastal development permit. That was approved. And then there was an amendment to that came back after the fact, and that included just a minor use permit, the design review, and the coastal development permit. And it is my understanding that was, as I indicated, based on, there was discussion between staff and the applicant's attorney about the termination, if it was a termination of the existing kind of drive-through use, and that was based on kind of 180 days. It's not my understanding the staff's position had changed and had concerns based on correspondence. We eventually did not require that major use permit. It came back to Planning Commission, I believe it was June of 2018, with the resolution amendment.
And if I can add to that, the determination was made that a good faith effort was brought forward with their design review and coastal development permit action prior to the 180 days lapsing, and therefore it was then determined to be a vested right based on that.
Okay. So I don't recall the amendment, but I guess I may have missed that meeting or who knows what, but, so, okay. So just to clarify where we stand right now in comparing the two projects, there was, in the end, there was no major use permit needed on the El Camino because it's now still considered still conforming, I guess, technically, because it's not a legally non-conforming, because I guess it's legally non-conforming because it doesn't have a major use permit, but it could be brought back with a major use permit and be made perfectly legally conforming.
So today, it still stands as a legal non-conforming use.
Right. Was there a reason that we would cancel a perfectly good major use permit that took it out of the legal non-conforming and put it into the conforming?
The focus at that time was solely on the 180 days, and there was no other discussion beyond that. So that was the main argument from the applicant, and therefore that's what the
Okay.
determination was based on.
Wow, okay. Let's see, so question about, we're talking about the difference between also a coffee shop and a restaurant, or I should say a drive-through restaurant. And I guess I need to ask the question whether or not a different brand restaurant that historically has a higher throughput or traffic load or queuing analysis, would it vest? Would it qualify under the vested right? Again, if it's a different brand and it's a brand new, In-N-Out was the one that jumped to mind. If somebody came in and wanted to put an In-N-Out there, it's a drive-through restaurant, not a coffee shop, would it be a vested right in that case?
So it still would be a restaurant with the drive-through use,
Yep.
but we'd still look at any alterations that they're doing to the drive-through and determine if those are an intensification of the nonconformity.
Okay. But the fact that it would be a drive-through restaurant would not in and of itself be an intensification?
That's correct.
Okay. I think that's my question, so with that,
I have another question.
unless we got
based
another
on
one?
what
Okay,
you just
Chris?
said. So I had a question as to why a coffee shop with a drive-through would be an intensification to a restaurant with a drive-through, such as an In-N-Out, which I think we've all seen the lines at the In-N-Out.
Do you mind if I answer? So, actually, one of the differences between a coffee shop versus a restaurant or fast food is the AM peak period of the generator, which is the same as the AM peak period of the adjacent roadway network for coffee shop, which intensifies the condition. So that can be one of the reasons.
So that's going back to the ITE data, correct?
Well, yes, but again, IT is not the only source that we use. Even if we find out that SANDAG and IT, both of them are not applicable for the study that we want to do, we normally request to conduct a survey of the similar land uses with the same category, like the same conditions, and ask the developer to provide the trip generation of the similar, actually, like land uses in the area.
Okay, so why was there not a traffic survey done here for this?
If I can chime in, this is not an actual proposed project.
Yeah.
And strictly just an interpretation of the intensification of a use. And so if there was a project, we'd make a determination at that time whether it would be warranted.
I do have one more.
Okay.
So I don't know if anybody can speak to this, which is Shepherd Mullins, in their brief, they say that the trip generation is irrelevant. I don't know if anybody can speak to that or not.
And if not now, they can always, staff will have an opportunity to talk at the end of public comment, but go ahead and answer if you can now, too.
So I didn't get the question. Would you repeat that?
Sure. So I read over Shepherd Mullins' document that they submitted that we got today, and they stated that trip generation was irrelevant.
No, I believe what they meant in their response was that since there is no, their interpretation is that there is no actual changes to the land use. That's why there is no reason to actually conduct the new study, the traffic impact study, and also the trip generation.
Okay.
So I believe that was the reason that is mentioned there.
And so it's staff's position that there is a change in the land use. So that trip generation is relevant.
That's correct.
Any other questions for staff? No? Okay. With that, we will open the public hearing. Does the applicant wish to address the commission? Make sure.
May I, yeah, I don't
Let's
know.
make sure do you have a green light there?
No,
on-
I have no light. But before you do that,
Oh, now we hear you.
yeah. Can I take this off? Is that okay?
Yes.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. We want to be able to hear you.
Yeah, clearly. Cindy Eldridge for Jack in the Box. I have 3 minutes seated from Cassandra Haynes of Jack in the Box, which I understand adds to my 10. I might go a little bit past that, which I apologize for in advance, but
That's
we have
okay.
a lot to say. Okay,
I think 15 minutes is not a problem tonight.
thank you. I'll make sure we keep it within 15 minutes. By the way, we didn't receive a copy of any staff memo, which I would assume is part of the staff report, although an appendage, so I'm requesting that we receive a copy. Okay, I'm ready. So, why are we here? The staff report may leave you with the impression that Jack in the Box stepped forward and said, let's ask the Planning Commission for an interpretation of the municipal code. And that's only part of the story, because the story starts almost 2 years ago with Cal Bay coming forward and beginning to work with staff and then with the city attorney to determine what would be acceptable modifications to staff to stay within the city's regulations. So eventually, Cal Bay said to Jack in the Box, this is really more your argument than ours. And they were right. Jack in the Box has a vested right. And so they asked us to start in, and that was a little over a year ago. So through all this time, almost 2 years, we have tried to work with staff and city attorneys to come to some range, some scope of project that would make them comfortable. We failed that, and then therefore we're before you, but we didn't run straight to you. We tried to work it out, and we've exhausted those staff level discussions. So why is this important to us? It's important to us because, as you know, as you've been told, Jack in the Box has legally existed in this space for 54 years, since before the city was incorporated, under the County of San Diego's C-36 commercial zone regulations, which did not require a discretionary permit. So Jack in the Box has been here for 54 years. I've asked for records from both the County of San Diego and the city of Encinitas. And what I'm told is there are no records of any code enforcement actions. So it's important. Jack in the Box has been respectful to the city of Encinitas and its regulations. It continues to be so and would always be so. But we think what's fair is that the city also step forward and exert its best behavior back towards Jack in the Box. So what's to be resolved? I found it a little, I frame things differently than staff. I think that's probably expected. But from our perspective, what is to be resolved? We have a legal non-conforming use unless we come through to you with a different request, which is for you to make a determination that the drive-through restaurant is similar enough to a restaurant that then we would establish that, and we would have a different determination. But we didn't go there because staff has already told Cal Bay that staff would not support ministerial permits, design review for the scope that Cal Bay put forward. So I think it's important to understand, back in 1968, the county had regulations, Jack in the Box complied. City incorporates in 1986, Jack in the Box is still continuing. Jack in the Box hasn't changed. I don't know what the city's regulations were in 1986 when the zoning ordinance was maybe put in place. Maybe not until a little bit later, because lots of cities handle it that way. But in any event, it doesn't matter. Either in 1986, you had a use as of right because the current zoning in 1986 allowed a use drive-in, drive-through restaurant as of right at that time, or as a legal non-conforming use. That continues. Jack in the Box has continued to operate. They have that vested right. So what right are we talking about? Several of you are getting to that already. We're talking about a drive-in, drive-through restaurant, which the city defines as a place of business which sells food or beverages, and which either A, delivers those food products and beverages through some kind of a partition to someone who is driving up outside the building, or B, the food and the beverages are being sold within the building for consumption either within or immediately outside. So there is no distinction made in the city's municipal code between a drive-through restaurant that is branded as a Jack in the Box and a drive-through restaurant that's branded as a Starbucks. You only have one use classification. So I would say that I need to set the record straight. The staff report indicates that Jack in the Box submitted an application to the Planning Commission for approval of a change in use. We did not. We do not. We asked that you interpret the city's regulations for us, not that you approve a change in use, because there was no change in use. You only have one use category. You don't have a drive-in donut shop, coffee shop versus, if you want to call it a hamburger drive-through place. Those don't exist. They're the same use. And so we have to also indicate that we don't agree with staff that this is a conversion of use. It can't be. It's the same use. And we disagree that there will result in a greater intensity of use. I'm going to get there pretty quick because there isn't anything in the city's regulations that require you to look at whether there's an intensification. What's required is the 4 standards that are set out in Municipal Code Section 30.76.050. Those are the sections and the issues, the standards that you need to be applying. So the first standard is whether the rebranding to Starbucks and the minor modifications would enlarge the existing drive-in, drive-through use. One standard. Second, whether the rebranding to Starbucks and the minor modifications would extend the existing drive-in, drive-through use. Standard 3, whether the rebranding to Starbucks and proposed minor modifications would expand. I'm looking at my notes because the words matter. Would expand the existing drive-in, drive-through use. And then the 4th standard is whether rebranding to Starbucks and the proposed minor modifications would in any other manner increase the inconsistency with the regulations of the zoning code. You have to go back to the zoning code. If it's not in the zoning code, you can't be inconsistent with it. If it is in the zoning code, then you look at that standard and see whether or not it applies. I don't see that that's what staff has set forth in front of you. As to the first 3 standards, enlarge, extend, or expand, your zoning ordinance does not define those words. You go outside of that and you ask Webster's, whatever you want to ask online source. Common usage means that there's an increase in size or time. That's what enlarge, extend, expand means. Okay? You've got to decouple it from the use issue because, as we say, there's only one use. So you take those 4 standards and you try to understand what that means in the context of the proposed modifications. And I'll come back to those a little later. The fourth standard, the last standard, is whether the rebranding and proposed modifications would in any other manner increase the inconsistency with the zoning ordinance. Okay, so in what way are we inconsistent with the zoning ordinance? First thing is, you're right, Jack in the Box doesn't operate under a major use permit because it doesn't have to. It's a legal, non-conforming use. Okay? So changing, rebranding from a Jack in the Box to a Starbucks doesn't increase any inconsistency with the zoning ordinance. The legal non-conforming use would continue. Now, I think Cal Bay is going to come forward a little bit later, and they are much more conversant in the specifics of those proposed modifications than I am. So I think they will address that, but what I was told as recently as today by Cal Bay's attorney, Jennifer Chavez, is that even if you go back and you redimension the spaces so that they meet today's standards, Cal Bay would still have one parking space over what's required unless you count that second or mezzanine floor. And Cal Bay can talk about it more, but it's my understanding that Starbucks and Cal Bay, in approaching the city for building permits, would wall off, roof off, whatever, make that second floor inaccessible. Starbucks doesn't intend to use it. Jack in the Box doesn't use it for much anymore. So if they're not going to use it and they're going to seal it off, then there are no parking requirements, there's no square footage. That's a nuance that, you know, we hadn't heard until this week, so there's some issues there that can be discussed. So I want to turn to the 5 findings of the draft resolution. So case law tells us that to be adequate, findings have to bridge the analytical gap between the facts, the evidence, and your ultimate decision. So in this case, it means you take the facts and then you analyze them against those 4 standards. Those are the 4 standards that matter. Under Jack in the Box's procedural due process rights, it has a right to know how you're going to evaluate what you're doing. And you have that in the Muni Code. But that's not where the staff report focuses. It goes astray in a number of directions that may be helpful, but ultimately what you have to do is look at your 4 standards and determine whether or not this rebranding and the proposed modifications fit within those standards. And I will say, if there's some discussion about size of parking spaces, I think Cal Bay and Starbucks are prepared to address that to make sure they fall within your regulations. So that's why I think that the Planning Commission is left legally with one determination, which is you've got a continuing legal non-conforming use, and the proposed modifications, if they fit within each of those 4 standards, then your decision is, yes, we can go forward. Cal Bay and Starbucks can apply for a design review. They can apply for ministerial permits. It's not as if they go out there and they change things tomorrow. They still got to go through city processes, which right now they're not doing because staff told them they wouldn't approve whatever Cal Bay came forward with. So your draft resolution has 10 whereas paragraphs and 5 findings paragraphs. So the first whereas is in error. As previously stated, this is not a change in use. So that recital doesn't help you. The third whereas is also in error. There's no change in use. And again, you have to look at whatever those modifications are related to the standards. And the standard ultimately is your inconsistency with your zoning ordinance, not the general plan, whatever. It's the zoning ordinance. You can take that specific plan along with that because that's your zoning, so whatever, the specific plan and your own regulations within the zoning ordinance. If the zoning ordinance doesn't talk about whatever it might be, whether homes are yellow, then you can't apply that, okay? Okay. There's a couple of these findings, these whereases, that of course rankle. The fourth one lacks an adequate legal foundation. There are no facts and no analysis to lead you to the conclusion that the Jack in the Box is outdated. Where does that come from? It isn't from evidence, but even if it were, it's beside the point. Your 4 standards don't talk about whether or not something is outdated, nor should it, because you'll run afoul of the constitutional protections for legal non-conforming uses. We also have that same kind of language a little bit later. That's the 7th whereas, where we have a conclusion that the current Jack in the Box is beyond its useful life and obsolete. Number one, where are the legal facts to lay, where's the foundation for that? But secondly, what does it matter? That's not your job to determine it's outdated, to determine that it's past its prime, which we disagree with. But that's not your job. Your job is to look for legal standards. The 6th whereas, I'm going to back up a little bit. Again, don't present any evidence to establish that significant traffic impacts currently occur at the Jack in the Box from the queuing of cars into adjoining streets. That's not the experience we have. We'd love to know what facts staff is basing that on, but we don't have it in your staff report. Your 8th whereas. Again, this says no, it's not relevant whether a Starbucks coffee shop is a different type of use than when the zoning ordinance was originally established. That has no play here. It doesn't fit into your legal standards. It doesn't have any strength under an analysis of constitutional legal non-conforming use rights. I think I hit the amortized. So what are we asking? We're asking that you decline to accept staff's recommendations, and instead you render a determination that the proposed modifications, and as I say, if we need to tinker with those modifications to make sure they fall within the standards, the legal standards that are applicable, Cal Bay is willing to do that. That's why we kept trying to talk with staff, but that didn't help. We couldn't go forward. So what I want you to understand, because it's important to me, is if you find differently, you're going to be violating your own municipal code. You got to go back and do some work in order to build a foundation. We don't think you can do it. And it would infringe on Jack in the Box's constitutional, both due process rights, both the process and the substantive due process. And I really appreciate your time.
Okay, I have a question too. I don't know if anybody else does.
Should I stay?
Yeah, stay.
Okay.
So in the findings, you were talking about the 4 findings. One of them talks about repair and maintenance. The nonconformity is not enlarged, relocated, or increased in intensity. And your argument you made before us legally was that the enlargement was a size or time only, but the nonconformity code actually talks about intensity. Can you describe whether or not switching from a Jack in the Box is or is not an increase in intensity when you go to a Starbucks, and if so, why?
It's a good question, thank you. I'm not sure what portion of the code. I know there's some provisions that have to do with structural nonconforming, and those are not the ones that we were focusing on, but if they're there, then, and we need to, we will. So why isn't it an intensification of use? I do think that somehow you have to differentiate. Are you now agreeing that it's the same use? But the question becomes, is it more intense? I think that's the right way to go, but right now we have a mixed bag because staff repeatedly say it's a change in use. But you go back to that Kentucky Fried Chicken that you all approved be rebranded as a Starbucks. You went ahead, you let that go forward. You didn't ask for any kind of analysis regarding the intensification of use. You conceded that you could rebrand from Kentucky Fried Chicken, which I think you'd have to say is pretty similar, I hope I'm not getting in trouble, to a Starbucks, I mean, to a Jack in the Box. Different food, but functionally, it operates pretty much the same. that went forward with no discussion of whether or not it was an intensification of use, and that's where we're standing. If you have a legal non-conforming use, I don't need to go out and find out whether or not there's going to be 1 more car, 4 more cars, 10 less cars. That's not the point. I get to continue my legal non-conforming use. I can't expand it. I can't enlarge it. I can't extend it. But the intensification, where's the standard for that? What does it mean? I don't know, because it's not defined in your code. And it needs to be, because that's part of what procedural due process is. I get to know what the standards are before I come to you and ask you for something. And if you're not adhering to your standards, then, and you're going to try to diminish the project in some way with all this language about being outdated and so on, then we've got a legal problem.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Shall I sit down?
Yep.
Okay.
Oh,
Thank you.
wait, no, one more.
Yeah.
And I believe, as the applicant, you'll have a chance to rebut at the end of public testimony, so you have another 5 minutes or so.
Thank you. I wasn't aware of that. I
And we'll
appreciate
usually
it.
leave the public testimony open, so if we need to call up you or any other, or Cal Bay or anybody to give additional information, we're fairly informal in that, and we'll call you back up.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, sir.
My question has to do with the Cardiff-specific plan, which has come in and said, you know, Cardiff's vision for that area now does not include drive-throughs. And Jack in the Box has been a good neighbor, and they predated, and so there's provisions in there to allow Jack in the Box to continue operating as a legal non-conforming use, the drive-through portion. How do you see, of the 4 terms, one of them is extend. So I could see from the specific plan point of view, it says, listen, we will allow existing non-conforming uses to continue, but we don't want to extend them timeline indefinitely. And eventually, we'd like to see the specific, the village or the community there be more pedestrian-oriented and not have drive-throughs. So how is converting that to a Starbucks not extending the timeline that the drive-through will continue to be operational?
Well, again, thank you for the question. Again, you're not talking about a change in use. It's the same use, because you only have one. It's a drive-in restaurant. So that drive-in restaurant is legally allowed to continue. And the courts have said it is not allowed that local jurisdictions put in prohibitions against maintenance, repairs, even modifications that would include produce inefficiencies within that structure, within that project. So just because you're a legal non-conforming use doesn't mean you can't touch the building, you can't touch the project, you can't restripe the parking lot. You can. And as for an extension, the legal non-conforming use is already allowed to go on in perpetuity. So there's no extension of time just because you've rebranded to Starbucks. Am I not quite reaching your question? And I apologize
No, I
if
think
not.
you are. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, do we have public speakers?
We do, yes. We have 3 this evening, and first up is Jackie Carnivas.
Hi, good evening. I am a longtime Cardiff resident, 22 years. I am a local business owner. I have one of my businesses is a woman's boutique at 154 Aberdeen Drive. My second investment firm is located at 120 Birmingham Drive, which is just east of Jack in the Box. First of all, let me tell you, I'm all for businesses and supporting businesses, but I'm not for the drive-through of Starbucks. That that road on Birmingham, even though you say it will be closed off and the entry into Starbucks will be off of San Elijo, in our office building, in my space alone, I have 10 people working there. So coming out of that building on Birmingham, so close to the intersection, you probably have 100, I'd say you could have anywhere from 70 to 100 employees coming in and out of that building. And you're going to get a bottleneck at that corner for people trying to turn onto San Elijo to go to Starbucks. And one of the most, I guess, troubling parts of this is that Birmingham is the largest main road for first responders to go down. They come down all day long. You can hear them coming down to head to the beach, and you're going to get a traffic problem for the people that are trying to go into that Starbucks or waiting to get into the line. The Starbucks in Leucadia off of Orpheus is completely created a disaster for the people coming in and out of there. So as much as I say yes to having a Starbucks, I am not a proponent of having the drive-through. And I also forgot to mention that I am on the board of Cardiff 101, and that is pretty much the view of the board itself as well. So I'm here as a local resident, and I'm here from a business perspective, as well as being an advocate for my hometown. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Ryan Shay. And following Ryan will be Glenn O'Grady.
Good evening, staff, ladies and gentlemen of the Planning Commission. Ryan Shay with Calbay Development. I'm one of the partners of the firm. We're based at 3770 Highland Avenue, Suite 208 in Manhattan Beach, California. We are in the business of buying and developing commercial properties, almost primarily restaurant properties. We are under contract to purchase and purchase the property from Jack in the Box, rebrand it, make it look great, refresh it. That's what we do. We do a lot of work with Starbucks and other tenants too, but we had identified this site for Starbucks from the very beginning. We started the pre-application, the SAC process in early 2020 before the pandemic started, if you can believe it. We, from the very start, I tried to explain to staff that we had no intention of adding 1 square foot to the building, not knocking anything down. We asked for a zoning letter right from the start, which we eventually finally got in late summer, I believe, which did confirm illegal non-conforming for the drive-through. From the very start, we tried to be very productive and problem solve. I mean, we felt pretty strong that since it's legal non-conforming, we continue to use the drive-through, but even still, we wanted to do everything we could to problem solve, because that's what I like. That's always what I want to do as a developer. I wouldn't be successful if I wasn't always to take that approach. But our frustration is that it seems like from the very start, staff was against it, never really engaged with us meaningfully on solutions. It seemed to us that they were trying to create a separate set of rules once they heard it was Starbucks, rather than just looking right at the zoning code. So I never was able to get into any sort of back and forth to problem solve some of the concerns that I'm hearing from staff and from the residents about. There's lots of common sense things we can do here, such as restriping like we proposed. We proposed only temporarily closing Birmingham, not permanently, temporarily. There's other things that can be done, common sense things to help mitigate some of the concerns. But I guess the bottom line really is, like I said, we're not building a new project here. This is an existing project that we're just rebranding. It's one food and beverage tenant to another. I mean, we're here to try to ask for your support in interpreting it that way, and to encourage staff to work with us to make it function as best that it can, given its existing size and configuration. There are things that can be done. We never were able to get into that back and forth. A lot of the reasons that were brought up being against the project we saw for the first time on Monday. We didn't have a lot of time to prepare for that. Our attorney sent a letter in that was barely mentioned in the staff report. We did propose a new site plan to address the parking things, which again, we didn't hear about till Monday. That wasn't presented. But the bottom line is we feel strongly this is not a change in use, and we would like to go forward on a positive note to try to make the site function as best that it can, given its existing size and configuration. And I'm happy to come back as needed to answer a lot of, I know all the details on the site plan that was proposed. I can come back up and answer any
I
questions.
have one question.
Yeah.
Does anybody else?
I have a question too.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I have a question regarding, there's already the existence of a Starbucks across the street. Is that also one of your properties?
No, it's not. That's I'm glad you brought that up because as I understand from Starbucks, they would actually propose, their plan is to keep that one open too. So it's not like it's all of a sudden transferring all the business from one to the other. I mean, that's how strongly they feel about the intersection, which good business they can do, that they would actually have both. I mean, so that it actually splits the business between two properties. So I think that's a positive thing. And I mean, there's other things I can go through. I kind of ran out of time. Maybe Starbucks is going to speak to some too, but there's a lot of other things I could go through. But I don't know if you want me to, or I ran out of time.
What I would suggest is when it comes to the rebuttal portion, why don't you work with the Jack in the Box applicant and coordinate on split the time there.
Okay.
Any more questions? I have a question if you don't.
Go ahead, I might come up with something else.
Okay. I'm looking, you referenced the letter from the city back in April 8th of 2020. And I want to make sure that I'm looking at the same letter and that I'm reading. And you said that it confirmed the non-conforming, which it did, but it also had a line in there, several lines, provided the operations of the drive-through remain, quote, as is. And then the next sentence, any changes to the drive-through or its operation will require an approval of a major use permit. So you agree that's the same letter?
Well, I don't have exact dates, but there was one letter that dealt with our the comments and staff. I think you guys called it, that's the SAC, which is like your pre-app review process, right? There was that letter, and then there was just the baseline zoning letter, which we asked for in the spring, but I don't think I got till the summer. So the April letter might be the SAC comments, which is the comments to the proposed site plan. I think
reading the title of it, it is the zoning compliance letter.
Okay.
For your project.
Yeah, it may have said that. I don't think we ever agreed with that. I mean, that we sent that to our attorney for interpretation. We didn't agree with that.
I wanted to make sure that we're talking the same facts. That's
Yeah.
all we're trying to get to are facts here. So.
I mean, we didn't formally object to I didn't go back and forth with staff to try to correct the zoning letter.
Understood.
Yeah.
But if there's a separate letter that somehow says it's non-conforming and doesn't have any caveats on it, that would be interesting. But I have not seen that yet, and I would love to, if maybe during the rebuttal, if you have it. But I think this is
I would
let
Cynthia comment if you have
okay.
on that one.
So, thank you.
I do have one more thing.
Oh, sorry. Another question.
I can't remember if I read this in the Shepherd Mullen document or if I read it someplace else, but I thought I read somewhere that there was an idea that if the queuing becomes too much, that it could be changed to a queuing at a window instead, to the outside. Did anybody else see that anywhere?
You're talking about mitigations that where if the queuing gets too long, you're saying?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I think, is Starbucks one of the planned speakers tonight? I think there's another speaker card, right? Are you speaking? Or?
No.
I mean, it's probably better for the Starbucks team to comment directly on that, but there are things that can be done, like you can put employees, they call them partners, in the parking lot to kind of go upstream. You can temporarily close parking stalls for just only during peak time to do like a Y lane. It's done near my hometown, Redondo Beach, only in the mornings. There's things like that can be done. Again, I think keeping the other Starbucks next door open is going to relieve a lot of pressure off of just a brand new store. But But I mean, the drive-through is pretty critical. What I didn't get a chance to say, I ran out of time, is that I'm not speaking for Jack in the Box only as myself as an expert that just buys and sells properties like this. If the drive-through is taken away from this property, just again, only speaking for Calbay, the loss in value is probably 33 to 50% because of the loss of business that can be done, which translates to lower rent, which translates to lower value. So I just wanted to make sure that's why we are trying so hard to find a solution here, and so.
And the Starbucks at Tamarack and the freeway, is that a Calbay project or is that not because that's a freeway Starbucks without a
Yeah, that's the one that people call the Leucadia one, right?
No, that's in Orpheus. That's in Leucadia. There's one in Carlsbad.
No, that one's not ours, but we did do a traffic, since Leucadia was brought up a lot and traffic, I mean, the traffic counts here are like, I think less than half of what was Leucadia. I mean, that's a freeway site, which in my business, we call like a regional site. Way different traffic patterns than a coastal site with around 10,000 cars a day. I'm not saying it's not busy. It is a busy intersection. If you just look at the numbers, it's more than double at Leucadia being an on-off ramp. So,
Okay.
So.
Any other questions you have for? Okay, thank you.
Okay.
I want to make sure we keep the discussion. We can go and talk about these other factors, but don't forget what we're here is strictly not to approve or disapprove a project, but it is an interpretation of the legal non-conforming status, basically. So I don't want to get too far afield from that, and we can spend all night and not have a project that we approve at the end. So let's see, I think we have one more speaker.
Yeah, our final speaker is Glenn O'Grady.
Glenn O'Grady, Leucadia. Haven't been on this side of the aisle for a long time. I just want to reiterate that if you're going back to the Starbucks project on El Camino Real, the idea of the intensification of use was not a factor in the discussion. It was strictly on the vacancy being more than 180 days. So what you would be deciding here would be new. You can't use, I don't think, my personal opinion is you can't use that project as any kind of precedent because we never considered that. I don't remember ever considering that. We talked a lot about traffic. I was just going back at I've got the staff report here, and we didn't have a traffic study. I thought we did, but we did talk a lot about increased traffic, and we spent a lot of words on preparing for increase because the Orpheus Starbucks, which I was recently on that commission that approved it. So we were very keen on not repeating that mistake. So we were we talked a lot about it, and we tried to ensure that it wouldn't be another Orpheus situation. So, but there was never, to my knowledge, and I haven't had time to look at the video, but I don't think we ever had that come up to us that we would have to, they would require a major use permit because of intensification, like more traffic. Now the In-N-Out Burger replaced a Del Taco, so it was fast food to fast food. But I'm kind of concerned personally about sort of making that distinction between a Starbucks and a restaurant. I mean, a drive-through is a drive-through, and who knows who's going to be popular. I mean, there's track record for Starbucks, but I kind of sympathize with the first speaker on is that in the code that we make that kind of a distinction? So, anyways, I just wanted to provide any clarification because the major use permit was required on the El Camino Real because we thought that it had been vacant for over 180 days and ergo lost the non-conforming use.
Okay.
So
I have
that
a
and the
question.
fact that from the design, I know you're not talking about the project, but 5 cars before the order sign, I don't think so.
So wait, before you leave, Glenn, because you and I were both on the commission at the time of the 266 North El Camino. And I recall that we had quite an extensive discussion in that first meeting where we approved the project, but we approved it with a major use permit. And the discussion, one of the major discussions was about the queuing, and it was because of the Orpheus experience with Starbucks that we, in fact, then required changes to the traffic pattern and closing. So part of the conditions of approval included closing off the that one section, that one
Right, there was an
entrance,
opening
right.
into, the entrance right off El Camino Real, there was a cut in the curb.
Correct.
So a car could jump in that way. And we realized that could really gum up the works, because, I mean, it was basically, 20 yards from the street. So basically, one car could just sort of screw things up. So we had, if you'll remember, there was concern about, there's another restaurant next door, and traffic cut through, and how to route it around, and making sure it had a very long queue length.
But in order, I think the major concern, like you said, was backing up out under the collector, or in this case, prime arterial. And in order to go from that blocked cut, if we had left it there, the queuing from that point went all the way around all four sides of the, and it probably was on the order of 10 or 12 cars by then. Is that,
Right,
do
I
you
mean,
agree with that?
basically, to get into the queue for that, a car would have to come in from the north.
Well,
So there was
that's where it
the
eventually went
traffic
to.
lane- The drive lane in the parking lot, just to the west of it, was part of the queuing, where they would come into the actual property through the parking lot and around to get into the drive-in, where the order sign was and stuff like that. But it would actually be able to queue out into the parking lot as well, the larger parking lot. So a car coming in from the main entrance there, where the stoplight is, would have to actually go around.
Okay, but that night we approved the major use permit with the full discussion of queuing and the intensity and the change from a Kentucky Fried Chicken to but that night we were under the working assumption that the 180 days had lapsed.
Right.
And that a major use permit was mandatory. And so you agree. I wanted to make sure that our recollections of that night were the same, because you said there was no traffic study, and as I recall, that's right, but there was a queuing study, and I think you'll agree with that.
I thought there was also a traffic count, but that wasn't, I was just looking up the report.
Yeah.
And it was the queuing analysis kind of thing, and we talked at length about that. I mean, our discussion included additional traffic. We were afraid that, again, another Orpheus type thing.
Right, okay, great, thank you.
All right.
Okay, would staff like to respond to, or actually, let me make sure I get my order correct. Is it staff next, or is it applicant? Yeah, no, staff. I'm sorry, no, applicant. Had my order wrong. Would the applicant like to respond in 5 minutes, and you can share it between the two of you?
Thank you. We would like to respond, and I'll give most of the time to Mr. Shay, but there were a couple of things. Commissioner Ehlers, you asked about the zoning compliance letter, which does state if you change things, you're going to need to come back for an MUP. I think that's what triggered all the discussions with Jennifer Chavez representing Cal Bay and the city attorney and staff on the other side. That's exactly why they kept talking to each other, because they did not see that what was being proposed would require an MUP. So it all leads us here. As to the intensification of use, you also asked, and I believe that what we're talking about under the code is an intensification of the inconsistency with the municipal code, not an intensification of use. Okay, so that's two different things. I very much appreciate the speaker here, who's a businesswoman, who's been here in in town for quite a while. I will say that the whole point is you have a drive-in, drive-through restaurant. That's the classification. It could be a Jack in the Box today, it could be a McDonald's tomorrow, it can be a Starbucks next year. So when someone comes in and establishes a business, which I assume is after 1968, because she's way too young to have established a business any earlier than that, then that person doing their due diligence needs to recognize there's nothing that says it's going to be Jack in the Box from now until forever. That's not the way that works. And please, Mr. Shay.
Yeah, I guess a few other points. You know, and I would encourage. I just, you know, our letter from Jennifer Chavez laid it out. I don't want to just repeat it here, but she goes through each point about how the items that were listed by staff are not intensification. Like, for example, the parking stalls not being striped to standard. We did address that. We provided a new site plan to staff, and we're still overparked by one. With respect to taking 2 menu boards that Jack in the Box currently has and just putting one in the middle. We just thoroughly disagree that's an intensification of use. And if it's off, if the height's a little bit off or width or a few too many square feet, I'm sure that can be worked out. Also, Jen Chavez advises us that just simply temporarily closing a curb cut on Birmingham, again, it's temporary. We weren't proposing to add any improvements. For peak times, only for safety, to lessen the chance of conflict in the site, we believe that is not intensification of use. I'm just trying to look at what else there was to comment back on. And again, I also want to say that I'm sympathetic to the concerns of residents and business owners about traffic. I get it. I mean, although I don't live in this city, I live in another coastal city with a very active and engaged residents in Redondo Beach. And just as a homeowner, I sympathize with there's sites around town, not just drive-throughs, that were built a long time ago that don't function how you'd want them to function now. I totally understand that. But the fact is, this is a drive-through. It's legal non-conforming. I mean, so, I mean, even though as a homeowner, if it was in my own town, for example, I would have to be sympathetic to the property owner. I mean, you can't just whack their value in half because someone doesn't like the new operator coming in. I just don't think that's fair or right. So I mean, I'm just not to repeat myself. I think I've addressed everything else. And again, I mean, Jennifer's letter spells out kind of more of the legal reasons why. You know, in response to the points of the staff report. And again, there are some, and there also are some, if staff's willing to engage with us constructively, I think there are some things we can do to really make the site function way better than it does now. I mean, like, for example, if you close the parking stalls on the southern end only during peak times for a few hours in the morning, you could actually stack like 15 cars on that site long before it would ever impede on any right of way. That's just one idea, you know, and a Starbucks employee can be out there if whatever time during peak times, if there's any risk of any cars backing up, someone could go out there and direct people to enter the next driveway, park, and walk up to the window. You can take orders. You can have multiple people that are taking orders. There's lots of things that can be done, but so far we haven't been able to get into that sort of mode of optimizing the site the best we can, but we're ready to do it.
Any questions? Just quick. Not right now. Yeah. So quick question on you say you would be willing to work with staff, but through what mechanism? What enforcement mechanism would the city have to work with and enforce then any use limitations in the future?
Yeah, I guess I see your question. I mean, it's our position it should be ministerial permits, but we just want to be productive and be good business owners, as does Starbucks, and we just would voluntarily, and it's in everybody's best interest, right? As us as their landlord, Starbucks is the operator, them trying to be, you know, do big sales there and be good neighbors. We were ready to volunteer all this stuff, but we just never got there to that mode, like I said.
Okay, thank you. No other questions? And then staff, would you like to respond to anything that was said?
Yes, in terms of the service letter, so at the site in the Carnivas specific plan, there isn't a mechanism to go through a use permit process to do modifications like we normally would see through operations. One other thing that you highlighted was the major use permit that was processed at the El Camino Real site. So the findings within that staff report actually speak to the intensity of development within those findings, and it also identifies curb returns, signage, and other mechanisms, queuing, spillover onto El Camino Real, and a number of other findings within that major use permit that was originally processed on February and then subsequently changed to the June. Thank you.
So a quick clarification on that with the findings and whatever conditions, when that major use permit got rescinded, then that legally went away, isn't that correct?
Correct.
So the city processed the minor use permit for other, I want to say, outdoor eating, and there was one other not related to the drive-through per se. So if we don't really have an enforcement mechanism on that site either right now for the drive-through.
Correct.
Okay. With that, I see gears turning, so I want to make sure we have enough time that we get all the good questions out now.
The city attorney has been referenced earlier this evening. I'm just wondering, the staff's position has been run by the city attorney, and the city attorney does agree with the staff's decisions?
I guess that's to me. So we've had a lot of discussions, and we would not be here if this wasn't a difficult decision. And I think I'll use this opportunity to kind of respond to some of the legal arguments that have been put forth in the letter, as well as some of the comments here this evening. So I think I want to start with the fact that in contrast to the other Starbucks, the location of this Starbucks is in a specific plan that does not allow drive-throughs. They're not allowed at all. And that's to be compared with the other sites where they're allowed pursuant to a permit. In this case, they're not allowed at all. And when we look at legal non-conforming use law, there is a contemplation that there will be the eventual elimination of such uses, either through abandonment, obsolescence, or destruction. So the concept is, as we move forward, whatever happens with this particular drive-through, any changes cannot add to the permanency of that use. Now, the issue here is whether or not what's being proposed constitutes a change of use. And they're suggesting to you that there is no change of use, and that when they talk about the traffic, that it's irrelevant. But what we're looking at is that it does change the character of that use, of that drive-through. And in fact, when we talk about an inconsistency to the code, what's being proposed are improvements to a site to improve the efficiency of getting cars through a drive-through. And it is based on the traffic counts we're seeing. It is to increase the demand and the use of that drive-through. And in that case, we're looking at it and saying that could be interpreted as an inconsistency with the code, that you are increasing the inconsistency with the code because the code says a drive-through is not allowed. So that's different than, hey, we can have it and we can have a permit. The other thing I would say is that there was some suggestion that they could make certain improvements, and they cite a case there that basically you can make improvements to kind of continue the use. The case itself said, yes, with a legal non-conforming use, you can make those uses that are necessary in order to continue your use. And in that case, they were improvements that were made to address health and safety requirements that the state had put on. So had they not been allowed to do those improvements, the use would not have been allowed. The last thing I would say is that there is a reference in the letter regarding the differences between use. Let me get to it. Right, and they reference Indara versus Culver City. And they talk about the fact that in that case, there was a change from a manufacturing of tiles and ceramic products to a production of laminated sheets. And the court said that that was not a change in use, it was substantially similar. On the other hand, we have a case that looked at an existing supermarket that was selling beer and wine. And they wanted to change to add hard liquor to that. And the court said, oh, that could change the character of the use. So what we're looking at it is we're saying, and that's why we're here with you, is that we're looking and saying, hey, if you think what's being proposed changes the character of the use, increases the inconsistency with the code, i.e., intensifies the use of the drive-through, that's what we're here to ask. And that's kind of the counter, if you will, or the context from the legal perspective that we've been working with.
Just to follow up, you're saying that there is a legal understanding that a non-conforming use will eventually cease to be.
Yes, that's the overall general concept. And you know, we've gone through, it's a law that's been around for a long time. We've gone through a lot of different iterations, but if you recall, there was a big time about billboards, and we wanted to get rid of billboards. And the court said you can, but you have to do an amortization of use, right? And so there is an expectation at the time that we have legally non-conforming uses that at some time in the future, they won't be there. Now, Jack in the Box might be there forever if they want to be there, but as we make changes to that site, this issue begins to come up.
Thank you.
I'll ask the,
And
Susan, go
following
ahead.
up on that, I would imagine that more cars means more emissions. And it would also possibly be something that we would think about in terms of our climate action plan.
Yes, but in a different context. So I think this gets to what the chair indicated, that today we're focusing on an interpretation. If we can get past that and they come forward with a project, then we can start to get into some of these other considerations.
So I'll ask you the same question about if this was a proposal to shift to a different drive-through restaurant, let's say an In-N-Out, would there be the same consideration of the increase in, increase in inconsistency? Do you think the same arguments would apply in that case as would here? Or is there a difference between these two cases that would say that's a pure drive-through restaurant and therefore it's a vested right?
No, and it's funny, I was hoping that we'd never have this In-N-Out conversation because that's what you're talking about. And I think we are talking about focusing on the drive-through, not necessarily talking about rebranding. It's really the intensification, the use of the drive-through, and whether it's a Starbucks or a Phil's or an In-N-Out, the real question is, do those operations change the character and nature of the use of the drive-through such that it would be inappropriate to, or be inconsistent with our legally non-conforming use ordinance?
I have a question. So I'm going to go back to the data that was used to determine that there'd be an increase in intensification. You would agree that that only captures 3 different times throughout a day, correct?
Yeah, let me just talk about that. I think the reason that we had to go there is because we couldn't get from the applicant the agreement to do a study. I think if we would have had if things would have been in the best case, we would have gotten a traffic study and a queuing study and would help us with this. Absent that, we have to go with what we can what we can at least get a handle on and use.
So do you think that that's good data to use, since it's incomplete data?
Well, I'm not an expert on that, so I look at it and I see that it is a standard that has been used, the ITE standard. It's also a standard that has been used to evaluate other Starbucks locations in other jurisdictions. So with that, I think given what it says, that it's a credible source, yes. With the understanding that, as I understand from you, is that you're looking not only for these peak times, but you'd like to have a broader perspective of the impacts during those times, which that particular model doesn't give you.
Right, because
Yes.
if we're going to go to the intensity question, I think that that's important.
Yeah.
Any other questions for staff? Nope. Okay. I'm going to leave the public comment open so that we can bring people up if we have questions, because I think that's still likely. And now we move on to commission deliberation. Did you want to go, Susan? There you go.
Yeah, well, with the 4 criteria that the staff laid out, at first, when I first thought about this project, I had an open mind, and I did have some concern because I have waitressed in my undergraduate years. I worked breakfast shift, which is very different than working midday or later in the day. And breakfast shifts are very fast with very high turnover, and you're really, really running. And those people are coming and going and coming and going. So I already kind of had an inkling that that probably would be more trip generation with this type of a business than with a full-service fast food restaurant. But this data from staff has definitely shown me it pretty much looks like it doubles. But I would say at all times of day, it's such a fast trip compared to fast food drive-through that you're going to see many more cars that are passing through. And with those many more cars, it's going to come much more emissions, because every car that drives through generates emissions, if it's a fossil fuel vehicle at least. And most vehicles these days are still fossil fuel vehicles. And so it's very concerning in terms of just those 2. Intensification is definitely higher. But then when I looked at the parking, which was something that the staff report showed, and the fact that originally this had a variance as a county project, all of this information in the staff report, the lack of general plan consistency, everything about this is very concerning in terms of we can't really look at this project without saying, my goodness, not only does it not meet our specific plan objectives, because it is a fast food type establishment, but it's an intensification of use of a previously variance-approved project, and it just gets worse and worse as I go through it. Then I look at the parking and the fact that we have this setback that was given this variance previously, and these 4 of the spaces, and then it's short the total required number of spaces. So as you go through it, it just sort of gets worse and worse, and then finally, down into this circulation with the closed driveway, it just sort of really falls apart. And so when I look at it, it's currently not a permitted use, even if it were a Jack-in-the-Box. But because it was approved with a variance, and it was a county project in 1977, it was allowed to persist. But now this would be a definite intensification of use. There's no doubt in my mind. And so now, with the trip generation, with the emissions increase, the parking problems, the signage is another aspect. It's really too much, in my opinion.
I just want to clarify and make sure we're in sync here. The parking shortage is not an intensification per se of this request. I want to bring us, I'm going to constantly bring us back to the legal question in front of the commission. So, and I want to avoid passing judgment on whether a Jack in the Box or a Starbucks or any other restaurant here is good or bad. The question we have before us is just the question of whether or not it's meeting the criteria for the non-conformity or not. I don't think parking I really don't think emissions per se is a basis for a denial of a use permit if using that as a surrogate. So I want to make sure that I understand your reasons for making the interpretation that you are, and I personally don't think that parking should be included, and then that signage, you can make an argument, you believe the signage is more intense than it was. Circulation, I think, to the degree that's been discussed here in the intensification. So if you could clarify that, I'd appreciate that.
Yeah, I guess one of the other things that I didn't say about that, the whole establishment, the circulation, the parking, it's a safety issue in my mind because Cardiff has so much pedestrian traffic, and you have people that are constantly milling around on Birmingham and on San Elijo, and going down to Chesterfield to go over down to the surf breaks at Cardiff Reef and at San Elijo over, to the north. And so you're seeing a lot of pedestrian and a lot of vehicular traffic already in that area, and it's all day long because the surf never ends, right? The surf breaks all day.
Okay,
and so
but there's a
depending what the tide is, you're going to have people coming and going.
Yeah.
And so it's a safety issue.
Well, there's
also,
a safety issue,
is what
but
I'm
again,
saying.
you've got to bring it back to, apparently you're saying it's a safety issue because this is a more intense use, or I'm trying to get to the legal finding. The safety issue is a result of if the project goes in. We're not talking about if the project goes in. We're just talking about our reasons for whether we would support or oppose.
Okay, well, to get more specific, okay, if we have these 4 spaces that are already in this setback because of the previous variance that the county gave in 77, and we now have increased intensity, and we need to widen our street, it's going to be really difficult to do that with those parking spaces that are in the setback, basically. And so it's got a shortage of spaces, which means you're going to see people trying to get in there and more stacking of cars out onto the streets. So it's a safety issue for that reason.
Okay. Other? I don't know whoever had it first.
Sure. Like you, I think it really comes down to me, really, the drive-through itself. I don't think the signage is I guess I would assume that signage could always be made to be compliant with the code, and parking. I wouldn't support reduced parking dimensions or, but, if the applicant had a new parking plan. I don't think that would be our discussion tonight. So to me, it really just comes down to, is a drive-through permitted to continue to operate there? And I agree with you, Bruce. I don't think it matters whether it's a Starbucks or Dunkin' Donuts or, any other business in there. And so, and I'm not sure where I land on this. I think the specific plan has made it clear that Cardiff would rather not have drive-throughs, and we'd rather do things that encourage pedestrian orientation of the streets and the community. And so, that a drive-through should be, I think the non-conforming use ordinances permit a company or business like Jack in the Box that was there before that rule was in place to continue to use their operation. But at some point, I feel like you've got to take steps to try to bring that property into conformance with the specific plan. So I'm looking at some of this language. It says a non-conforming use may be replaced with a similar use as long as the subsequent use does not extend the inconsistency with this regulation or title. So even if I don't think about the intensity of that use, does it extend that use now for the next, dozen or, number of years, because it's, it's been refreshed and a new business that orients to maybe using only that drive-through? I mean, I think that's my challenge. And not being a legal mind, I feel like there's got to be a way for this thing to sunset eventually, not have a drive-through there. But I'm not sure exactly where that mechanism is, other than I'm seeing the word extend, and I feel like in some ways a new business coming in there, utilizing the drive-through is extending the life of the drive-through.
Well, can I respond to that?
No, unless, I think, Chris, did you have your hand up first? I think you,
Yeah, I do.
yeah, and then Susan.
Okay, so I have quite a few things I want to talk about. First, I'm not convinced this is a change of use. I think I think a Starbucks and a Jack in the Box are both restaurants, and they both offer food and they both offer beverages. So I don't think that I believe that it's a change in use. So that's kind of my starting point. So the issue of whether we get to intensity or not, let's just say for purposes of talking now that we get to intensity of use, I feel very uncomfortable relying on incomplete data. And I think that conclusions were drawn that there'd be increased intensity because of data that the only data that was available that had to be used only had those very 3 specific timeframes, which include breakfast, which is 7 to 9, which is a popular time for people to get coffee, dinner time, and weekends. I don't think that it's complete data. I have a concern about the timeframes. I have a concern about the fact that it's 67 surveys. We don't know when or where those surveys took place. We don't know what kind of businesses they are. So I have a problem relying on data that I don't feel is complete in order to make a decision. I think, okay, yeah, we can all say yes. I mean, I'm of anybody here, I'm probably the most impacted by the Leucadia Starbucks, since that's my neighborhood. I pass that Leucadia Starbucks every day, sometimes more than once a day. And I can tell you that it is a nightmare, and that traffic does back up so that it blocks the freeway exit at times, especially during COVID when the restaurant was closed. So I understand the queuing problem, and I understand that everything that people would say as to why that could be a logistical nightmare for the Starbucks to be there with queuing problems. But I don't think that we quite get there yet. I think that we're moving too far forward in the process, getting to that and using that as a reason to make a decision today, when today we need to look at what's in front of us and what we have here that we need to consider, which is whether or not it's a change in use. The thing about extending, to follow the logic of extending, anytime a new restaurant would go in there, whether it would be a KFC going in instead of Jack in the Box, or a Starbucks, or an In-N-Out, or any other restaurant, it would therefore probably likely extend the use, because obviously Jack in the Box is interested in moving out of that spot. So we can't say with any kind of certainty how long Jack in the Box would stay there if someone else wasn't willing to come in and buy the property and then use it for another purpose. So I don't personally have a problem with the extending language, because basically we'd have to say, if we're going to rely just on that extending as a reason to deny this, we'd have to say that no other restaurant or any business with a drive-through can go in there. And we just have to, once Jack in the Box leaves, it's done. And I don't think we have any legal, anything legally to rely on to say that. So I don't have a problem with the extending language. So let me just look at my notes. Do you have anything else here for the moment? I also don't know, so just getting back to the numbers for a minute and the data, I don't know that I'm convinced that putting a drive-through in that location is going to increase traffic to that location for the purposes of using that drive-through. I think what it might do is it might draw people that would have gone to the one in the Nightmare parking lot across the street. It might take them over to that one instead. Or take them to the Starbucks and instead of taking them to another business in the area where they might buy coffee. But I don't know that, I'm just not convinced that that's going to draw people off the freeway in the same way that the Acadia Starbucks does. But that's kind of getting to the intensity issue too. But my first point is that I'm not convinced that it's a change in use.
Susan, I think you were next.
Okay, well, one of the things I want to let you know is that when I lived in Venice, California, I lived 4 blocks from the drive-through Starbucks. And believe me, the queue was quite long. And now I live in New Encinitas, and I've been there over 7 years. And, of course, we have a drive-through Starbucks on El Camino Real. And so I'm not too far from it, and I do see that queue. And I do see it as something that is not part of the Cardiff-specific plan to allow that kind of queuing at a fast food restaurant. And I don't think that it's very safe for pedestrians to have that kind of queuing. But I also believe, as a planning commissioner, that my viewpoint isn't what is in front of us right this minute. I have to have a little broader view than that. I have to be able to be a little bit clairvoyant. I have to be able to see the future a little bit. And so, yes, Jack in the Box has been there 50 years without too many issues, right? But Starbucks is different. It's very different. It's an intensification of use proven by the ITE data, but also because I used to waitress many, many years ago, 37 years ago or whatever it was, that I was an undergraduate. I know that kind of clientele, how fast and how many will go through. And I know it's going to generate a lot more trips. And so I don't have to imagine it. I saw it when I lived in Venice on the drive-through on Lincoln near Rose Avenue. I see it now on El Camino Real. Okay, and I see the future if we have an intensification of that use, if we have more traffic on that street, more car trips, there will be a need to widen it eventually.
Steve, you
and
had
we
your
won't
hand
be
up?
able to do it.
Thank you. I agree with some of the sentiment that Chris expressed. The data showing that the intensification of the traffic at the morning hours is somewhat incomplete. I mean, what if you looked at the lunch hours? Would the Jack in the Box have surpassed the intensity of some other in some other time period? So I do think the traffic counts are a little misleading. They find one problem spot, and it's right in the morning. I'm not saying that it won't be an issue, but it's a little hard to extrapolate and say, well, maybe another business in there would be a problem in the afternoon or a problem in the evening. Because I kind of agree. I don't feel like it's a change of use in that way. I think they're both basically restaurants, and so I'm really struggling, I think, to find a clear, opinion on this thing.
Yeah, it certainly is a hard one, so I'll hop in now. I agree with the city attorney in that I don't believe this is a matter of branding. I think it doesn't matter what brand it is. I also believe that it's not a signage issue. I believe that they're roughly equivalent, and I could never make enough findings to say that minor difference in that sign versus that sign, that's an intensity change. I don't think in accounting it's the concept of materiality. I don't think it's material to the intensification or to the use, non-conforming use, whether it's in or out. Parking, I also, that's not before us tonight. That's really not something that I would consider a criteria as far as whether this is a non-conforming continuation or not. It really comes down to whether Jack in the Box has a vested drive-through here, and what are the limitations on the I'll use their attorney's terms, the size and time, but also I believe the intensity of use, and I think that's what Barry referred to. So there is, and on each one of the other conversions for Starbucks, we have looked very deeply into queuing as a measure of intensity of use, as a measure of impact to the neighboring properties, because ultimately, at those time, for those projects, we were talking about a use permit, and the criteria for a use permit, the findings have to be that there is not a materially detrimental effect on neighboring properties. So the concern here is, does the change in operation cause an increase in the impact on neighboring property, or I'll say it more legally correctly, and correct me if I get this wrong, Barry. Whether the change in operation causes an increase in the non-conformance. So I want to make that very clear. That's fundamentally the question. Whether the vested right, whether the proposed new operation, be it whatever it is within the bounds of the current non-conformance, or whether this pushes it out. And both the cases of, and I'm going to use In-N-Out as an example, and the Orpheus Starbucks as an example, where clearly the new use at an In-N-Out would be the queues are huge and would very likely reach out into neighboring traffic. And I believe that we can look at this project, and if it's going to exceed the queuing in particular, but the intensity of use, that I think that that increases the non-conformity. And so at this time, and I look at the data, and I look at the whether it's the Sandag, I always have to look that up, what's the name of that one? Not so brief guideline that is kind of the standard, but it doesn't cover everything, and we do standard that we heard staff. We go to the ITE as an alternate, and it doesn't have all the time, but we can add to that our personal experiences and common experiences in the city. And in this case, we can look at the Orpheus Starbucks, where clearly whatever was approved there undercount the queuing in particular. And then subsequent to that, we come to one of the future Starbucks approvals, and a vast majority of that discussion was about queuing and how much we can buffer. And in this case, in this future project, the buffering is like 8 or 9 cars, where it was 27 in one case, and I think it's somewhere like 16 in the other case. And so I can reasonably, based on experience of that, looking at the ITE data, I can expect that this is going to cause a increase in the nonconformity due to the queuing. And so with that, I agree with staff. I don't agree with all the findings, and I thought the applicant's attorney was correct that some of the statement of findings in the resolution, I believe, should be rewritten. So if we do make this interpretation tonight, I would ask that we also consider revamping and probably simplifying the findings in the resolution. Steve?
Just to play devil's advocate, so would a less successful business proposing to go in there be okay? Is part of the problem is that Starbucks is too successful a coffee seller, so they get too many customers? If another business came in, was a coffee shop that said, that didn't have a name recognition or whatever, and I don't know, it seems difficult to make a generalized decision based on a specific, one company that you think is going to do too well.
Yeah, so under normal circumstances, if we were just going in and it was a location that would allow a drive-through with a use permit, we would go through, we would have the mechanism in place. That's why I asked the applicant about what mechanism would be there in place. And I think we all agree that there is no mechanism in this case. If we continue the non-conforming use and don't request to look at intensity of use or increases in the intensity. So the answer is there needs to be some, and I'm not talking about tonight, but if we were looking at a regular major use permit, yes, we would look and say the traffic modeling or the queuing modeling or whatever we reasonably choose has to be less than a certain threshold so as not to increase this nonconformity. So we're in a very unique situation tonight. We're not saying that it has to be a less successful, but there has to be some evidence in front of us that would show us that it's not going to increase the nonconformity.
Could I ask a question of staff? When the data for the ITE, were those all of the time categories that were available? Or are we only seeing 3 categories? We see the morning time, we see a peak after or weekend time, and there was a third one.
6 to 8.
6 to 8. But was there a noon to 2, or were there other time frames that were available?
For the coffee shop location or the coffee drive-through, it did not have afternoon data in the IT manual.
So I have a question for you, Bruce. So I'm just asking, just for clarification, so let's say CalBay brought to us a Jack in the Box for this location. Would it be your same opinion that that would increase the nonconformity?
No.
Is that because you think that the Jack in the Box and the Starbucks are different uses?
Yes. No, okay, I think what I said was they're both drive-through restaurant uses, but I believe the difference between, it's not a branding issue, it's really a increase in the intensity of the nonconformity. And in the case of the particular nonconformity that I'm concerned about would be queuing that reached a level that it was likely to end up impeding traffic on San Elijo.
Okay, so what if it was an in and out, the lines at like lunch or dinner?
Yeah, and that's where I think I asked Barry the same question, and he said it wouldn't matter, but it would come down to the predicted increase in the intensity of the nonconformity, and in all likelihood, the data would show that an in and out would not work in that location as an equivalent usage, that it would actually be increasing the intensity of the nonconformity.
Right, so you're basically saying that an in and out would be in the same position as Starbucks?
Starbucks, yeah, it really.
So getting to Steve's point then, the only change in use, not a change in use, but the only change in the branding would have to be to a business that was less successful.
I don't know that successful is the right word.
Would have fewer cars using the drive-thru.
Less intensity, yes. It can't, we know the bar is set. The question is, do we believe intensity of use is one of the bars? But I do. The analogy I use is with size and time, they're very obvious. It's deadlines, it's height of buildings, it's number of parking spaces. Those are easy, but in the increasing the nonconformity, the intensity of use of the nonconformity, we have to look at other parameters, and I think queuing being the most quantitative and easy to predict and measure, or at least that it can be predicted quantitatively, is the easiest one for me to rely on and say, yeah, I know that if it increases that intensity, that is going to be a problem for the neighbors. And that's where, if this was subject to a use permit, where we're saying it isn't technically, but if it were, we would potentially have, the city would have the ability to put in operational parameters that would require, and in past projects, we've said if a queue backs up at restaurants, not at drive-throughs, but at restaurants, we would require valet parking. We could do that kind of stuff, but that's not this case. We're basically being asked for a straight up-down interpretation, and you know, it's my opinion right now that the intensity is a parameter just the same as height, but it has to do with the intensity of use, and I go back to the non-conforming law to base this. So, any further discussion, or I guess what, I think we have a feeling, but I'm not quite sure where all of us are, so.
Bruce, if
If
I
we
may,
go-
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I thought you were done. I heard one thing from, I think it was you and maybe a couple of other commissioners, that parking related to the use was removed from the discussion. Yes, there's a structural nonconformity, but I think the other direction that staff was looking for in the staff report was a determination on the trip generation, and I'm hearing some feeling on that. And then the other was the circulation, just a simple change in circulation of a site. Does that enlarge, extend a nonconformity? And I think those other 2 points too, maybe just kind of clarifying those 3, and then if there's others too, that would be helpful as well, just so that staff knows how to move forward with this property.
I'll hop on, anybody, as far as restriping existing asphalt, I, under very limited cases, would see that as an increase in intensity. I think it's minimal. Putting up the bollards, I thought Jack in the Box was trying to minimize the impact. Again, to me, it comes down to the operational characteristics, and if the restriping were to manifest itself as a operational intensity difference, then I could make an argument, or if it manifested itself in a way that would increase any of the nonconformities. Right now, in this case, with the proposed restriping, I don't see that. Steve?
As I stated earlier, I kind of started there thinking that parking really wasn't an issue to me, but I could see how you could argue it that if by restriping or redoing the parking lot, you increase the capacity of the drive-through to handle more cars, then you are increasing the nonconformity. And so it seems like a bit of a catch-22 or a oxymoron to say that we want the circulation to be less efficient on the site, but by making it more efficient, you're increasing the capacity of the drive-through to hold more cars or to serve more customers. So I only just now are thinking that actually makes the case for not doing the drive-through, though the last thing you'd want to tell a applicant is to try to make your project worse than it could be, but that's a thought.
Kind of goes against your, what is there, an architect's creed, that you can only make things better?
So I would just respond to that, though, that if you are making the drive-through capable of handling more cars, that would actually lessen the queuing problem. Because if it could handle more cars within the parking lot itself, there would be less chance of it queuing out into the street. So it's sort of a catch-22 on how you handle your parking lot, right?
Absolutely, or maybe fewer customers go there because it's always difficult to queue up and use the drive-through, so they, but if they can handle more cars that go through, maybe more people want to frequent that thing. And I don't want to get into trying to disadvantage one business over another, and then, we want them all to be successful in Cardiff.
So are we to the point of, should we try a motion or not? I mean, I've made a proposal, I could turn it into a motion, but I want to make sure I incorporate everything that everyone's thinking, or at least a majority.
I don't know what proposal I would make at this point.
So,
Well,
So
we need a motion now to deny.
well, I'm trying to formulate whether we can try some motions in order to get the clarity. I don't know, it's, I think we're not too far off on some, it's really a question of whether or not, what is the reasoning behind if we find for the applicant or against the applicant? It's in my personal position, and like I say, I came in here not knowing for sure how I was going to vote because there's a lot of unknowns and a lot of things came out in letters today. So there's a lot of reading late today, right before the meeting. But I
The
think
entire project would have never been approved after 1986, correct?
I can't say that, and I don't think we should even say that because right now we're not considering the project, and I want to be really clear about that. That this is strictly about the interpretation of the law applied to this set of particular circumstances. So it's kind of different than a project. But if I were to make a motion, and Steve, I'll look for your reaction because I don't know if I'll get a second on this or not. It would be to approve staff's denial based strictly on at least one, maybe two different reasons. One, that the proposed use would increase the intensity of use and the intensity of use of the non-conformity, the drive-through in particular. I would put that under, as proposed in the example in front of us, the restriping does not, in my opinion, increase the nonconformity, nor does the parking or the, what was my other one, signage.
Well, what about the height as well? That's another nonconformity, the height. Building.
I thought there was a memo
Part
that
of
was
specific
not.
plan.
The height doesn't have anything to do with the interpretation of the use permit, I think.
Okay.
So I would leave that one out. But my reason for stating all that is that I would ask that staff bring back to the full commission a rewritten resolution if we support my denial, and that we then verify that the wording of the resolution matches what we really have said here tonight.
If I could just interject, and this is really semantics, but you're not being asked to deny anything, right? You're being asked to make an interpretation. And I think, Bruce, you're on the right track in terms of saying that based on the conditions that you indicate, it's the planning commission's interpretation that results in an increase in inconsistency with the nonconformity. I mean, I think that's what we're trying to do because it's important for us to be as specific as we can as we go forward, but also this interpretation theoretically will be applied to other situations, and that's the idea behind an interpretation. So it's not necessarily a project approval or denial. It's how do we interpret the code? How do we apply the nonconformance law?
I completely agree, except the resolution says denies the case.
Yeah, I know.
So
yeah,
I was just trying to stay within the realms
Okay,
of the
well,
framework.
yeah,
So, okay. But I agree with all your comments about what we're doing and how we're doing it, which is exactly why I want to make sure we get the resolution findings, because all indications are this is going to probably go somewhere else, could eventually end up in court. So I want to make sure our discussions are very succinct and clean. I want to make sure the resolution of whatever we do tonight is succinct and clear, and that we all have enough time to look at it. So I can convert that to, I don't know, Steve, you want to react to it? At least tell me whether I'm on the right track, off, or, just or Chris or Susan, anybody.
I would say it has, the use nonconformity is probably our primary reason, but it still does have structural nonconformity as well.
And that would come up in a future project if and when a project comes before the city.
the way I see it, it has, the use nonconformity is the number one criteria why we would deny it.
Tonight.
But it does also have structural nonconformity. So, when you talk about it intensifying or increasing nonconformity, those things are part of it.
I think I'm coming around to the idea that the ITE data, even though it doesn't include the entire day or a 24-hour period, it does identify a period of the day when the intensity of the drive-through is expected to exceed the intensity of the current drive-through. And so I guess I'm coming around to think that that is applicable and pertinent to the decision. I don't think it's got to be demonstrated necessarily that over a 24-hour period that there is no variations in intensities. All you really need to do is identify that there is a period of time where the intensity is greater. And so I think I'm kind of coming to that opinion. I'm not sure where I stand now on the restriping of the cars, but I don't see any issue with the signage. I mean, there are structural things, but those would just be worked out during a project application.
So, so a couple things. One is the data we're comparing is not data of Starbucks versus Jack in the Box. It was restaurants with the drive-through versus coffee shop, donut shops with the drive-through. So this is splitting hairs really, but we don't know exactly what the usage is of the drive-through at the Jack in the Box. We don't have that data, and we don't have data what the actual use of the Starbucks would be either at this location. So I'm not convinced that this results in the inconsistency with the nonconformity. So, I mean, I don't like to rely on data that I don't think is complete, and that's kind of where I'm coming down.
Okay. So does anybody want to make a motion or one way or the other? We'll see where we go, or I can if...
I think go ahead for it. Go
Oh, okay.
I'm happy to also answer Commissioner Sherrod's question about the structural nonconformities. So for example, parking, they would, if they come forward with an application, whether it be tenant improvements or design review, they would need to demonstrate that they are in compliance with parking. And we do have a record of, if you have nonconforming parking, as soon as you change it, you do have to bring it up to conformance. So they'd have to demonstrate that when they come forward. So I just want to clarify that, yes, the structural nonconformities are there, but they would need to demonstrate compliance with those to get the tenant in there.
And likewise, say a future project, if we do the denial, or would have to come back and show that they're not increasing the nonconformity of the drive-through.
Exactly.
Such as intensity, as we've discussed.
Correct.
Yeah. So they would have to present data at that time showing what the current situation is, what the future is.
Yes.
Or what the proposed is, and show that it's less and not increasing the nonconformity.
To show conformance with the nonconformities chapter, yes.
So, Steve?
I might just respond to Chris's comment. I think, to me, the ITE data, because it is generic, I'm more comfortable applying it because it's not picking a specific company and trying to analyze their success rate at generating traffic. It's just saying, in a broad category, a restaurant or a burger joint is different than the coffee shop, regardless of what company it is. The irony of it is we know that a company like In-N-Out has a huge queue. Yeah. But the same logic, if you applied my logic, you would say an In-N-Out would be okay there because it was in that same category of the ITE rating.
Right, and also the ITE data doesn't show lunchtime, which we know at an In-N-Out would be huge.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, and so I'll go back, and I'm not relying explicitly on the ITE data. I think the ITE data is a good indicator for the morning and evening only. What I'm relying is on similar experience and analyses that have been performed and presented to the city for the other Starbucks, and also the practical post-mortem, if you will, because it's been discussed at length up here about the Orpheus Starbucks, and even some pictures I've seen and personal experience being by that Starbucks in the morning. And my thought is the morning commute and the evening commute are the two critical times for those intersections. So probably the most critical and probably the most impacted. We have ITE data, but as I said, I'm not solely relying on that. I'm relying on practical experience of other Starbucks that we have discussed. I'm relying on other analyses that have been presented up here as a parallel. And I do believe that the data would bear out. The queuing will exceed the minimal queuing that is proposed here, and that intensity increase would increase the nonconformity of the drive-through operation. So with that, I'll make a motion to, and I'm going to say deny, but but deny primarily because of the increase in the intensity of the nonconformity, and not because of the parking, of the sign, or of the, what's the third one? The branding, and as far as the restriping, I'm on the fence. Right now, the restriping to me is only to the degree that it impacts the intensity and the intensity of the drive-through. So, I guess I can be mute on that and just leave that out. But and then the second part of my motion would be that we bring the redrafted resolution back after staff and city attorney have looked at it to make sure it's very tight with what we've said here tonight, and we consider that at a future planning commission.
Excuse me, Chair. You do have the public hearing still open, and so just wanted to make sure that if you
Okay.
wanted to close it or not.
I think at this point, yeah, we can close the public hearing. So,
How about if we would move that it would be considered an intensification of a nonconformity and inconsistent with the city's Cardiff-specific plan and municipal code?
I think that fits, right? I mean, that's essentially the nonconformity, so, yes,
Intensification of the nonconformity,
exactly.
I'd second that.
inconsistent
Cool.
with the city's Cardiff-specific plan and municipal code.
I would agree with that.
And just to be clear, that's on the basis of the queuing, increase in queuing.
Primarily, yes. Again, it's the queuing associated with the drive-through use, the non-conforming drive-through use.
I just seconded that motion, but is there room to, I do think the ITE traffic counts are part of my decision in that.
So make a friendly amendment to the...
Friendly amendment to
Okay,
include the ITE
based-
morning counts for the intensity.
Okay, very good. I would accept that as a addition to the motion. So any other discussion on the item? If not, we'll call the question.
I do have, I'm so sorry, one question about, do you have any specific modifications to the resolution that you want to state as part of the motion?
I think there was a lot, I think actually the applicant's attorney pointed out some, I'll call it superfluous arguments in there. And so I think we want to be laser focused on this in anticipation that it could end up in front of the city council, it could end up in court, and I want to be unambiguous about the reasoning for our findings.
We can do that.
Okay.
We have her comments, and we can look at it in light of your actual decision and make sure that they're consistent.
And I would even, I want it to come back for public review, so that it can come back on consent calendar, but then somebody could pull it, we could pull it, and if we had questions, it's just,
Okay.
we'll make sure we do the public business in the public forum. So we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
One more time, I'm so sorry, another one. Is that, would you like it to come back at a date certain, renotice the?
Date certain would be ideal.
We
And
have,
so we can amend the motion to, if you can give me what do you think the date certain would be?
so the next one would be the 18th? 18th or December 8th?
I don't see any reason why we can't do it on the 18th, unless it's mostly a staff question, so.
It would be acceptable, yes.
Okay, so Steve, is it okay if we make it come back date certain the 18th of November? So that's another friendly amendment. So again, we have motion and second. Any other? One last? No, it's good. Now's the time to ask. So, okay, we'll go ahead and vote. And this is a motion to deny, basically. Okay. So we have 3-1. And with that, I think we'll take a 10-minute break before we go on to item 8B. Correct? I'm seeing nods, yes. Okay. Thank you.
finished it.
As the chairman, you have to learn to add windage into the estimate for a break. So if you say 10 minutes, you know it's probably going to be 13 or 14. So we're at 12 right now. Yeah. So next time when I announce the 2-minute break, we'll know that we're trying to hit 10 minutes. So. And I'm not trying to make fun of you, Chris. Yeah, okay. Or I should have apologized for making fun of you because you happened to be walking in. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, I don't know if everybody heard, Jennifer came in and she was off listening to the mic feed, and we have to get really close to these mics apparently. Well, this sounds better, maybe they up the gain. But I noticed that during the first half of the meeting that if I turned my head, the volume went down a lot and I had to back over and speak always right in front of the mic. So with that, let's see, it's 8:50 and are we ready? Come back into session and we'll move. 8B, I think is what we agreed to. So this, I just have to find my notes. Jeez. There we go. So this is item 8B, North Coast Highway 101 Drainage Improvement Project, case number CDP NF-004-271-2020 and CPP-004272-2021. This is a public hearing to consider a coastal development permit to allow the construction of storm drain improvements on the North Coast Highway 101 and within Leucadia Roadside Park. The project includes a new underground pipeline ranging from 18-inch to 66 inches in diameter, new curbs, gutters, new bioretention areas, storm drain inlets, and other associated improvements, and temporary construction staging. The project is located on North Coast Highway 101 within the public right-of-way between Basil Street to La Costa Avenue and 560 North Highway 101, which is Leucadia Roadside Park. Are there any disclosures? Okay, none. And we begin with a staff report presented by Senior Planner Andrew Maynard.
Thank you again, Chair, Commission, and public. This is the North Coast Highway 101 Drainage Project. The applicant is the City of Encinitas, and we have a large project team with us tonight. I have Jill Bengston, the project manager, to my right. I have Bob Stark to her right, and then Joanne Tyler. And then I have Michael Trapp to the right. I have Lillian Doherty behind me, the director. And then we also have online also David Villas and Michael Lyons with NBC, and also Tom Ryan with Q3. All experts if you have any questions tonight. As you indicated, the project is one discretionary permit, which is a coastal development permit, and ultimately a CEQA determination. The site, as you indicated, is located within the North 101 right-of-way between Basil Street to La Costa Avenue, and also within Leucadia Roadside Park. The site, the zoning is NTC and also NHP, which is in the North 101 specific plan. And the overlay zones include the scenic visual corridor, cultural and natural resources, and the coastal overlay zone. Surrounding conditions, common occurrence we see during the rainy season are impacts with flooding and water on our roadways, impacts to businesses, residences, bikes, vehicles, and pedestrians. Public outreach for this project did include a citizen participation meeting that was held virtually on January 19th, 2021. We had approximately 73 people in attendance. And these are the kind of listed are the common questions that we received related to pipe outfalls, junction box sizes, inlets, contaminant loads in the stormwater, BMPs. There's questions about technical studies, and they get a copy of those, which we did release. And then just flooding along Vulcan, and then traffic impacts, sedimentation, and parking. And then there was a public notice mailed out to 500 feet within the overall project scope. That was on October 21st, 2021. Staff received no inquiries before the release of the staff report. We received just one letter today from the Bataquios Lagoon Foundation, which was forwarded to the commission. The coastal development permit includes the construction. It's approximately 1.5 miles of new stormwater main line and be underground on North Coast Highway 101. The intention to store and convey runoff. The sizing for that piping ranges anywhere from 18 inches to 60 inches in diameter with depths 4 to 20 feet. Along with the project, they'll create larger inlets to help drain the roadway faster. There approximately 77 new inlets at the local low points at Leucadia and at Leucadia Roadside Park. Also includes Green Street improvements to improve water quality, and there's no proposed changes to existing pipe outfalls. Also, there's construction staging associated within the right-of-way, and then traffic control will be required during all times during construction. The overall project, the intention is to reduce flooding to benefit, as you saw from the previous photos, kind of vehicles, cyclists, pedestrians, businesses, and residents. It also will reduce pollutant load with biofiltration, dispersion, and landscaping. There's two potential methodologies for the construction. One's the standard kind of open construction, which would be excavation with 2-to-1 gradients on the side. The width is approximately 10 to 30 feet in width. The second method potentially could be microtunneling, which would be more specialized construction and equipment. It could include pits 40 feet long by 15 feet wide and approximately every 300 feet. Construction staging, as indicated, would be just within the right-of-way. The approximate location would be Europa, between Europa and just south of Leucadia Boulevard on the east side of 101. That would include laydown areas, storage areas, construction worker parking, and any construction trailers as needed by the contractor. Overall, there was 3 technical studies provided by our experts, one biology, water quality, and a paleontology report. For biology, we had identified existing biological resources. It was reviewed with potential impacts, and those were with erosion, dilution with salinity depression, sedimentation, and overall pollutant load from the project. The overall conclusions were that there's no adverse impacts to biological resources. The second study was a hydrology and water quality technical report prepared by MBI, analyzed pre and post conditions. Overall, it evaluated the impacts to our water bodies, surface water, and wetlands. And with that, there's also conclusions that there wouldn't be adverse impacts to overall water quality. Last was the paleontology report. It was done by Paleo Services with the Natural History Museum, and it did identify a few different formations, Bay Point Formation and Santiago Formation. The conclusion with monitoring, there wouldn't be adverse impacts from the project. And with that, the potential fossil salvaging, cleaning, cataloging, and there would be an ultimate report. As indicated at the beginning of the presentation, there's 2 overlay zones. One, the cultural and natural resources, and it's just a sliver of the project. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, it covers within the right-of-way. Based on the report and active monitoring, there should not be any impacts to those resources. It's also within the scenic visual corridor. Again, that's on the very north portion of the project only. And there would be no visual impacts because it'd all be underground improvements. CEQA determination was made. There was an addendum to the environmental impact report related to streetscape, and that was case number 10035 DRCDP EIR. There was no substantial changes, which require major revisions to the previous EIR. There was a notice of determination that was filed. There was a subsidy related to this project, and that was for the design review component of the undergrounding of utilities. Ultimately, the resolution does include mitigation measures included with the draft resolution. Based on that, staff's recommending approval of this project, case number CDP 4271-2020, subject to the conditions and findings in the staff report. We can answer any questions. Thank you.
Any questions? It's like Chris?
Yeah, I just have a quick one. So looking at the, I'm sorry, I was told I need to speak really closely to my mic, sorry. The flooding that occurs at the alley, kind of behind the Cotilla restaurant at the corner of Leucadia and 101, would that be assisted by this project?
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. It would be assisted by this. So this would not solve all the flooding problems throughout all of Leucadia, but it would certainly improve the flooding at that location.
Thank you.
Any other? So I have a couple of questions. On the environmental determination, so was that a staff level decision that is made that we're operating under, I guess, the original streetscape EIR? Is that how that worked?
So there was a substantial conformance process, which is an administrative process, no notification, but it was posted online. But there was the same addendum associated with the coastal permit was associated with that substantial conformance decision.
Okay. So essentially, we're operating under the original streetscape EIR, and that there's no significant impacts beyond that due to this new addition to the project.
That's correct.
Okay. And the energy dissipator that was added, I think at least at the edge of the lagoon or in the lagoon, is that done? And was that part of the hotel project?
Yes, I believe that was part of the hotel project, so it's not part of this project.
Okay. And then I think one of the contentions in some of the public comment was that the large pipe, the storage pipe, if you will, would not drain during dry weather flows. And is that true, or will it not completely drain even during low flow periods?
I'll defer, I think Joanne can help with that, but it is a drainage system that is meant to convey low flows as well as storm flows, but I'll see if Joanne has additional information to share.
Yeah, Jill is correct with that statement. It would function like any storm drain system in the low flow and dry flow events.
Okay, so after a storm event, it would temporarily store water, but it would always be metering it out until it is empty and only taking whatever quiescent flow was going through. So and to maybe counter one of the public comments, there wouldn't be a flushing of stagnant stormwater, or would there, during a future subsequent storm event?
No, it's the new pipeline is not a storage device that has an elevation below the outlet. So
Okay.
it's a continuous flow all the time.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's all my questions for staff. So with that, any other questions? No? We'll open the public hearing. And Dina, do we have public comment?
We do. We have one speaker, and that would be David Hill.
You've got us, though, so we're here all ears. Wait, do we have your microphone on? You might want to speak closer to the mic.
There we go. I turned it on.
Oh, there we go. Now try.
Okay?
Much better.
All right. Okay, I'm David Hill. I represent Bataquitas Lagoon.
Maybe if IT could turn down the volume just a little, I think we've overcompensated. Hang on, we'll keep your clock at 3 minutes. And since one of you is speaking, I'm sure if you need to go a little over, we'll be happy to indulge. Okay, I think we're good now.
Okay. David Hill, Bataquitas Lagoon. I'm a board member. I'm also the chair of the Water Quality Monitoring Program. And I live here in Encinitas in the last almost 40 years. One of the issues we have with the Bataquitas Lagoon, trying to keep it preserved, enhanced for the benefit of the community as well as for the protection area, which it is, and the habitat, is to try and limit the amount of effluent going into the lagoon. It's the proverbial bathtub. And if you never, and it's the problem, trying to keep that bathtub clean and keep the animals and keep the mammals and keep the birds happy, if that's possible. But so when we come along and we find a project such as this one, it appears to not take into account very well the issues that Bataquitas Lagoon suffers from. And we are the subject of urban runoff, surface water runoff, continuously. People want to see the lagoon, they want to see it, and it looks pretty and everything else, but they're not concerned about maintaining the quality of the water and protecting it from the onslaught that we see all the time. And not only from Carlsbad, from the north side, from the south shore, from the ag properties, the former western property, as well as from Lake San Marcos, the eutrophication of that issue coming into the lagoon. And now we find that we got a lot of heavy metals in the east part of Bataquitas Lagoon, which was discovered by the city of Carlsbad under the 2018 BITE Coastal Conservancy program put on through the State Water Resources Board. So we got heavy metals out there. It's not the fact that we got small toxicity going on. We have a whole slew of chemicals that are being discovered. They don't know how they got there, but they know they're there. We got barium, we got zinc, we got lead, we got copper, we even got PCBs. And there's other pesticides and also other obnoxious metals in there. So it's not just, there's nothing going on with the lagoon. We do. We have some serious problems that the city of Carlsbad is trying to address. But at issue here is, sure, the land, the flooding of, and the elimination of the flooding has been going on for the last 50 or maybe even 60 years or so, way before I came here. And finally, it's going to get hopefully resolved to some degree. I do have people who live down in that particular area. But one of the issues is that we need to protect the lagoon. And if you're going to drain 200 acres, and you need to understand that it's 200 acres, and the normal civil engineering application on this is to retain at least 2,400 cubic feet or 2,500 cubic feet per acre as a retention, as a structure, in order to analyze it and to treat it if necessary. So when you multiply that out by 200, you've got, and it's in my letter, then you'll see the math, there's quite a lot of cubic feet to be considered. And we recommend that that would be a retention structure to save the lagoon from being an onslaught from the 100-year storm. And as per part of the publications that was in part of the package, there was a 700-year storm last year. And I'm sure that everybody got leaks on their roofs or whatever from that one. But I want to say one of the things is that there's some engineering situations with the original design, and certainly not least is trying to when there's a storm come in and say the 100-year storm comes in and it fills up the 66-inch line and it starts heading down to the Bataquitas Lagoon, there is no retention structure on the 24-inch at the low point of the junction box. The other two outflows, the 18-inch and the 24-inch, goes over the ponto, but there's a 15-foot hydraulic differential there. It will never get up there unless you close that valve, let it rise up, and to get rid and flush out the first flush of what's in that pipe. Other than that, everything is going to go into the lagoon, and there'll be no overflows going to the Ponto Beach because it's hydraulically not possible in order to get there. And if you do get there, there is a natural spring which the animals live on and they feed off over at the Ponto Beach. And right at that spring outlet, and I watch it, it's clear water. I wasn't tempted to drink it, but I would have to if I wanted to. We were going to analyze it and see what the DNA of that is, do a trilinear analysis of it to find out the source. But the thing is, you've got an 18-inch and you've got a 24-inch right above the spring, and it's going to dump right into there. And there's no plans available to show that's going to go safely over to the Ponto Beach, the influent of the lagoon. And I just want to say one last thing, that we need to do not only the TMDLs, and I was emphasizing that in my letter, because it's been ignored over the years, talking to the city engineers and other projects, that doing the TMDLs is an excellent way to find out what the waste loading is and to give the people the ability to find out, are we doing the right thing or are we not doing the right thing? And if the city, as a signee to the COP committee and the MS4, you have an obligation to maintain and do the right thing to protect the lagoon. You spent $30 million
Okay, if you
on the
can wrap
streetscape,
up.
but we need to address the retention structures, what I put in there.
Okay, thank you. And we did get the letter, and I believe everybody had a chance to read it, so.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, staff, do you want to respond to the public comment?
Sure, I'll let Bob Stark here take the lead on the water quality aspects.
Thank you, Jill. Hi, I'm Bob Stark with Michael Baker International, the environmental manager on this project. Just in summary, high level, I think it's important to reiterate, because I think Andrew already pointed out in his staff report, the pipe is being designed within what we call a Green Street approach, which is recommended and approved by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. So we're actually filtering this water and treating the water. Currently, water floods. It has all those pollutants in it, and it is stagnant, and it's sitting there, and it's ultimately flowing over land into our water bodies, including the lagoon and the ocean. This first flush concept is a really important one to convey, and what many of you have probably heard of that before. But during the dry part of the year, the various urban pollutants are gathering in our streets. Motor oil is dripping, there is dog poop and other nasty things there that are contributing to pollutant loads in the lagoon. When we have a rain event, that first flush is the most critical time during that storm for water quality concerns, because it is literally washing all of that off of our streets and sidewalks into the storm drains and into the lagoon. What's going to happen in the future conditions, should the city elect to move forward with the project, is we will have rain gardens, other media that is treating and infiltrating that first flush of stormwater with all those nasty ingredients in it. It's treating that, filtering that out, so then no matter how big the storm is, all of the water conveying, and when water would ultimately convey into the lagoon, only after a certain amount, it's overtopped the existing outlets to Ponto, then it's going to the lagoon. That outlet is not changing. The water is cleaner coming into the lagoon. It is not causing erosion at the lagoon. It is not causing a decrease in salinity to any effect that would affect eelgrass there or any of the species and habitat that exists in that arm of the lagoon. So I think it's important to just understand that at a very basic level. This is a water quality, stormwater quality improvement, as well as a flooding improvement project.
Okay, any other staff response to public comments?
Yeah, I think there's another piece to it, as Bob mentions, it's a Green Street exemption project. So we're not adding any impervious area. If you add impervious area, then yes, you're required to retain some of your water and treat it before it's discharged. But because we're not adding any impervious area, we are treating it in a linear fashion through the methodology that Bob mentioned. And then, Joanne, I'll give you an opportunity to speak a little bit to the dispersion structure where we have the 3 outlets. So why don't you kind of speak to that and the ability of the water?
Yeah, so the diversion structure is designed so that the bottom 2, we connect into the existing, what is existing today out there, the 18-inch RCP and the 24-inch RCP that drain to the Ponto side of Highway 101. And that does go through the basins that exist there today to filter the water and treat that water. That is the first flush. So that is at the bottom of the dispersion structure. And then as the water rises in a larger storm event, it will overtop into what is now existing in the 24-inch that goes to the Bataquitos Lagoon, through that the structure that we talked about that was installed or updated with the hotel infrastructure. So in that way, we're not impacting or constructing anything in the either side of the lagoon or the Ponto side.
Okay. So we'll move on to questions. Any other questions from? I wanted to just check. So I think what was stated by the public speaker was that kind of the opposite of what you're saying is on the ground, that the lower one will actually go into the filtration basins on Ponto side, and the higher one is for after the first flush, that would be the overflow for a storm event. Did I get all that correct?
I think you have that accurately. Joanne might know what the storm level where that happens generally. I don't want to put you on the spot, but it's only during a 25, is that the right storm event level?
The first, it would probably overtop close to the 10-year storm event.
10 years. So we're talking about a storm event that in on average you have a 1 in 10 chance of happening in any given year, and it's that storm event where we start to see that junction box. Oh, it's gone from the big screen now, Andrew. I don't know if we can pull that back up. Where that water level you see in the box there would rise to the level of that top pipe that exits to the existing outfall in the lagoon.
Right. I'd like to add, though, I think that the differentiator here is that the 85th percentile storm, which is what we were discussing as being that first flush, will always be going through those lower pipes. There's definitely the difference there in the lower pipes, and the upper pipe is well over the 85th percentile storm. So.
Okay, and if nobody else has a question, one more follow-on to that. In the letter from Mr. Hill, he talked about having a settling area, and he showed an example up by the La Costa Park and Ride. Where does that function occur in the green streets? Does that happen in retention basins that are part of the green street structure? In other words, where do the heavy metals fall out of the water?
So I'll start. So the structure that was included in that picture is a Caltrans structure, and that structure is needed because they've added impervious area by adding more traffic lanes, and then that water is not treated. So that's where it's treated for Caltrans. For us, we're treating the water before it enters our pipes by sending it through landscape areas, dispersion areas, biofiltration areas before it enters our pipe. So that's where it happens.
Okay, so it would happen and go into the earth and stay there and not be flushed downstream unless there was erosion, I suppose. Okay. Okay, great. Any other questions for staff? Or if not, we can move into deliberation. Anybody want to go?
I have no issues with the project.
Okay. Chris, or?
I'll just say that the follow-up from staff I found very helpful.
Yeah,
on the process. So
Yeah.
thank you.
What I'm hearing from the comments and from the staff, seem to be different things. Is the analysis of the pollutants being performed, and if so, how often? And also, is there going to be the TMDL that is required? And is there going to be a retention basin that has the type of control that will not release into the lagoon until they're sure that those toxins are not present? How is that being done?
So I'll start off and then hand it over to Dr. Trapp to my right, who speaks total maximum daily loads, which is TMDL, and knows all the chemistry behind that. I'll start off by saying the lagoon is we call a 303D listed water body, which means it has pollution. The pollution is defined as toxicity. So it's a very vague term for a lot of different things, constituents that may be in there, which is different than saying lead or copper. It's kind of a catch-all because they are finding little bits here and there. TMDLs are a very watershed-wide approach to addressing a water quality issue in a water body like the lagoon here. So it would be multi-agencies and the Water Quality Control Board. On a project-by-project basis, we as a city are required to be compliant with the MS4 permit, which is how we construct things, and that means, considerations for pervious surface increasing, as Jill explained, putting in other treatments. So it's not something that's measured. What we do know with certainty is that these rain gardens and other treatments that go along with the Green Street design of the pipe do filter those contaminants. So it is, in my mind and the staff's mind, inarguable that the water will not be of better quality when it leaves that pipe than when compared to today's conditions. Building off of that, I'll hand it off to Dr. Trapp because he is an expert in all things TMDLs and toxicity and the various constituents and how those may or may not be measured and under what circumstances.
So Betiquitos Lagoon is currently considered an impaired water body,
Correct.
and it's threatened by at least 3 pollutants. Is that correct?
I believe it's currently listed in the 303D list, which is the national listing of impaired water bodies for toxicity. Toxicity is kind of an umbrella term as a reaction for target organisms to either reproduce or for chronic to survive in the water. So it's very much meant to be an indicator of a potential issue. It can be caused by any number of things in the environment that can affect the target organism. So often it's used to help inform and to be able to go and look for additional pollutants where those can be controlled to improve the water quality. In this case, you said that it's identified by the monitoring. The TMDL process is a very, very long process. There's tens of thousands of impaired water bodies across the country. The number that actually get TMDLs made for them is small. Technically, yes, there's a requirement for progress to be moved towards creating the TMDL, but that is driven by regulators. I don't want to put words in the mouth of the regional board, but there is a process of characterization that needs to be done before that so you can understand the loading going into a water body so it can be properly characterized and a plan can be made to correct that. So with toxicity, again, you have to make some characterization of what's causing it so you can be able to make those. So it is a very long process, and I don't think I can speak on behalf of the regulators on where that process is for this particular water body.
We do have a member of the regional board in the audience today, and she's willing to speak if you'd like to hear some more information on that.
I would. I don't know about, I have questions that would probably go down this line. So if you wanted to speak, the public comment's still open, so yeah, you can take your mask off too.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes.
Yep.
Hi, I'm Riley Garcia with the San Diego Water Board, and I'm here to answer any questions.
So I think there's a letter in the report from your organization,
Yes.
And maybe even more than one. You're in support of this improvement?
I don't think I'm here to support or not support. I'm simply here just to answer questions. That letter that was addressed by my organization was in response to a letter from a public resident, Mr. John Helly, who is not here today, but he had concerns with the project's compliance with our regional MS4 permit, and that's what that letter evaluated. So what we found was that there were no violations from the city in determining that the project qualified under the Green Streets exemption, like it was brought up.
Okay.
So we didn't have any issues with the MS4 permit itself.
And would your organization be the group that would require a TMDL type of analysis, or I shouldn't say analysis, tracking, and have you for this project? I think that was one of the points Mr. Hill made.
Yes, I did definitely hear Mr. Hill's inquiry about a TMDL. Specifically, we have another unit and we have another contact who I would happily share with. But in terms of developing a TMDL for this water body, I would have to consult with my TMDL unit team to see where we are with that. Currently, there is no TMDLs in this water body, Bataquitos. So that would be something that I could get back to Mr. Hill on where our prioritization is for adopting a TMDL, or if we are considering anytime soon.
Okay.
But just to answer the question, it would be something that our agency would begin the process for.
Okay, very good. No other questions? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
And so I would turn to staff and ask kind of the same question about the TMDL. Does staff, why did we or did we not? Why is a TMDL necessary or not necessary for this project? I guess in this case, we're not asking for it. So what is the appropriate mechanism to track these kind of pollutants?
Okay, I can speak to that process a little bit. So a TMDL would be for the entire watershed, and TMDL stands for Total Maximum Daily Load, which is a little bit of a misnomer, but it's generally looking at the entire loading of a pollutant into a watershed. And so it's not really focused on an individual project, but rather an entire watershed and a holistic look at any sources within that watershed for a particular pollutant. So when you would evaluate a particular project for that, particularly with new development, you'd be looking if it's causing or contributing to that load. And in this case, this project would actually score fairly well because it's the natural bioretention process of which the first flush is going through will preferentially remove particulates very, very well. So when the idea of heavy metals, which can cause toxicity, is brought up, you're removing those particles so they're not making it to the lagoon, and lowering sedimentation, particularly, lowering heavy metal transmission. But also, even when you look at organics will bind very well with the other organic material in the soils as it passes through. And so you get a lot of water quality benefits that for constituents that could contribute to toxicity, which is what the impairment's for Bataquitos Lagoon. But again, a TMDL is would be looking for the entire watershed, all of the contributing forces both point source and non-point source within the watershed.
Okay, so, and the Lagoon Conservancy certainly is looking at the entire watershed. They, they're the custodians, I guess, of that, the bathtub, I think is the analogy you used. So where does the process start? If ultimately the Bataquitos Lagoon Foundation, as a custodian of the lagoon and therefore the watershed, how do they initiate a TMDL process whereby projects like this would have to show and then track over the future? Because we all know this is not the end of Leucadia improvements and future projects all the way around, but in particular this area. It seems like it's time to start tracking it so that in the future we can make decisions whether we really improved it. And I'm not saying this project this is a great project. I think it's wonderful, but I'm trying to decide, as part of this, is it time to require that we, at least for our portion, start providing the TMDL data coming out of the outflows of this project?
I think Morelli from the regional board may be able to provide some more data, but TMDLs are set by the Regional Water Quality Control Board, and then the cities and the various jurisdictions implement controls to help meet those TMDLs and reduce the pollutant load that's coming into the city. And my understanding is they generally establish TMDLs on a priority basis. So the most impaired water bodies get the TMDLs established earliest.
Okay.
So I think that's a little bit of good news for Bataquitos Lagoon. We would certainly want to do our part to make sure that we're reducing any kind of pollutants, and this project is doing that.
Okay, so you're saying it's outside the purview of this commission? Okay, great. I think my questions are all answered at this point. Anybody else have discussion or deliberation? I support it. I see it as a huge improvement in the water quality. I think all the conjecture or some of the comments, I think may have been off base and in opposition, and I think fundamentally it's a sound project that will improve the quality of the water.
I agree with that.
So if there's no other comments, or maybe somebody make a motion?
I'll make a motion to approve the project as recommended by the staff report.
I'll second.
Okay, any further discussion?
So let me just be clear on this. We do not have a TMDL established for this body of water?
Yeah, it's not ours to establish. From the testimony, it would be.
It's done through EPA, correct? And we don't have that?
It's done through the.
Environmental Protection Agency, EPA?
No, I don't think it's through. Is it through the EPA? Did you want to come up and comment? Because I think the more we learn about this, the better, and the better stewards we can all become.
I just want to make sure I understand. There is no TMDL established. And right now, there is no monitoring on a regular basis after storm events?
For the Bataquitos Lagoon, I would have to double check if there's any outfall monitoring in that lagoon. But I know there is a planned study led by, I think, the Carlsbad Copermites to develop a stressor study for Bataquitos Lagoon. And so there is going to be some monitoring, but for sediment stressors.
So my understanding is that the agency that is protecting this body of water is recommending that we hold off on this vote.
No, I don't believe I'm recommending that. Simply, I was just saying that there is no TMDL for this water body, and the TMDL would be established through us with collaboration with other jurisdictions like City of Encinitas, any other jurisdictions that have input to the Bataquitos Lagoon, and then it would go through our process our TMDL process depending on prioritization. And eventually, we would submit that, whatever that TMDL would look like, we would submit to EPA for approval.
Thank you.
Okay.
Oh.
So any other discussion about the project? We have a motion, we have a second. If there's no further discussion, we'll call the question. Thank you. Oh, there we go. Okay. So we have 3-1 passing. And with that, we will move on to item 8A.
Before we get there, I'm not able to access any of my documents. I get an Adobe Acrobat error.
Are you talking about
So-
on 8A or all of them?
All of them. I couldn't access any of the documents for that one either. Steve's having the same problem.
Yeah, I had problems at home. Once I downloaded for 8A, the PDF was 56 gigabytes or some.
This is like if you try and
56, sorry, megabytes. It was huge.
I get an error message that there's a problem with Adobe Acrobat Reader.
I get that too.
We'll have IT take a look at it.
I think it's just going to be important for this next. Okay, so.
It's such a big file. I actually ended up splitting mine into like 4 different files, and I found Adobe was much faster. It was normal. Yeah. Well, hang on before we start. So maybe the first question we could consider, do we want to go beyond 10?
No.
I'm just gonna, I gotta ask it, here it is, 9:37, and we're obviously not going to finish this in the next 20 minutes, but then again, the staff recommendation today was to just take some input from us, I guess, in the time remaining, and then continue at date certain. So while they're working on that, why don't we work on a date certain? I think we're saying the 18th of November. I got a yes on that. And just so that we don't overload the 18th of November, I said December. Did I say December or November?
You said November.
November, oh, phew. And so the 18th of November, how's the agenda lining up for that? Is it,
We only have one action item.
and I think we put another one to that, didn't we?
You asked
The
for it to be
resolution
on
coming back. So
consent
the-
for the
Okay, so,
resolution.
so it's a reasonable, so that's probably a great way.
Yes.
So we made Jennifer wait all this time. So the question is, unless we get the IT stuff cleaned up quickly here, I wonder, do we just put off the entire item and continue it? And I apologize for keeping you here till 9:30, 10 o'clock.
I say we continue it.
Okay. Jennifer, is there anything, should we are you okay with us just continuing it, doing it all on the 18th?
That's fine. Whatever you guys prefer. I'm here for you.
So nobody has access to the document right now? I mean, I have it on my laptop, and like I say, I had to break it up into smaller chunks so that I could pull it out in 4 different sections, and then I found Adobe worked great. But when I have a gaming computer at home that couldn't handle that file, and it was troublesome, so.
Couldn't open the last one
Yeah,
either, though.
the same error for the
Oh,
last
for the
one.
last one, okay, that's something completely different. So since we don't have a huge agenda for the 18th, I would propose we continue this item, date certain, to November 18th, and I can make that a motion, if I can get a second.
A second.
Second.
I think Chris beat you to it, Steve. So we have a motion and a second to continue item 8A to November 18th. I think I could remember that. Motion and a second? November.
Said November, right.
November, yeah. November 18th, so with that, if there's no further discussion, and so it passed. So with that, we will move on. If I can find my, the rest of my agenda. Where'd it go? It's probably back here. There we go. Okay, next is future agenda items added by planning commissioners. Are there any agenda items that you'd like to add? Nope, wait.
I am wondering, is there a way that we can get rid of our masks anytime soon?
I think that
When
is
will that happen?
I think that's a question that staff will work out with, first the city council, and the city council would decide, and we just follow what they're doing.
It kind of muffles the sound. It makes it harder to hear.
Yeah, I think the public would agree. I think we all agree the sooner we can get it, get to that point, the better. But in the meantime, safe is better than sorry, and we follow the policies. So, okay, planning commission reports. Are there any planning commission reports? No? City planner reports?
No, just reiterating from last time that on November 15th at the community center, there'll be the El Camino Real workshop, public workshop.
Oh, yeah. Okay, and with that, we're to adjournment. So thank you, everybody. Our next regularly scheduled meeting is November 18th. And so this meeting is now adjourned to the regular Planning Commission meeting of November 18th, 2021 at 6 p.m. Thank you.
I think